the Industrial Revolution of the Mage Lord. Hey! Look who's back for more adventures. We love having you here to continue this story that keeps us all awake. Important note, all of this is pure fiction. So don't try any techniques you hear here in real life, your neighbor might call the cops. This amazing novel and all its rights belong to the original author. We're just the ones giving it voice and drama. Are you enjoying the show? Prove it by subscribing to our YouTube channel and leaving that like that motivates us so much. And if you want VIP access to exclusive content, our Patreon is waiting with things you won't find anywhere else. Chapter 276 Return to Reality, Fee Settlement. After completing his mental link with the Scorching Overlord, Harvey didn't hesitate. After informing the legendary chief of the details and precautions for the upcoming interdimensional transfer, he immediately manipulated his mental projection back into the real world. Despite being separated by different spatial planes, he still needed to maintain the mental link. Thanks to the immense mental power provided by the immense mental anchor, Harvey only needed to maintain a highly focused meditation state to ensure the link wouldn't be abruptly severed by the distance. Waiting nearby, Reiner had collaborated with Harvey on numerous infusion experiments. Upon receiving Harvey's instructions, he expertly approached the planetary energy array and pulled the lever to activate the massive magic conversion device. The inscribed symbols on the array's base illuminated one after another, and the device began to emit a low, slow hum. But Reiner didn't stop there. Instead, he pulled the lever again, raising the array's operating power to maximum, a critical power supply mode never before attempted in the territory. The slightest mistake could overload the energy-gathering array, leading to a complete breakdown from overheating at best, or a complete explosion and destruction at worst. Reiner then directly took a thin energy tube and inserted it into the charging slot at his waist. This allowed him to directly sense the strength of the energy absorption and conversion within the energy-gathering array, allowing him to constantly adjust the power to ensure the equipment remained at the critical energy supply point without overloading. From the heights above, Faden and Kali watched in shock as the events unfolded below. The entire mine was now filled with a surge of pure, rich magic power, forcing them to hold their breath and remain silent. They stared intently at the three strange, giant alchemical instruments and the teleportation array they surrounded, which constantly shifted lines and runes like a living thing. A moment later, a subtle, almost imperceptible fluctuation in space appeared above the brass-based array. Surrounded by several bloodline warriors, Harvey stood motionless, eyes closed, clearly in a state of meditation. A flush gradually crept across his pale, bloodless face, and beads of sweat trickled down his forehead, as if he were at a crucial juncture in some ritual. The spatial fluctuations above the magic circle intensified until a translucent rift in space appeared, visible to the naked eye. Then, a figure, tightly wrapped in countless strange gray tentacles, slowly materialized from the rift, slowly transforming from intangible to substantial. The three high-speed energy-focusing arrays began to emit a sharp humming sound, straining under the strain. Reiner repeatedly adjusted the power levers, but was unable to stem the surging stream of pure, violent magic energy. One thin energy beam even passed by his shoulder with lightning speed, directly knocking away the solid metal armor plate made of phantom copper. The bloodline warriors gathered around Harvey, but dared not even move the Lord, who was currently in a state of meditation. None of them flinched, instead erecting three-finger-thick alchemical plates in front of them for a bit of protection. What on earth are they planning to do? If this continues, the entire mine will collapse under this raging magic, Kali, recovering from his shock, hurriedly suggested to Shield, who was standing beside him. McCollin, let's evacuate this place first. Ignore their crazy experiments, Shield frowned, about to speak to dismiss his chattering, cowardly subordinate, when he suddenly felt a familiar surge of magic behind him. He spun around and saw a dark figure sprinting through the mine entrance, moving with a flickering speed towards them. Gallagher? You're not. The black-robed chief raised a hand to silence Shield's question, then looked down with a solemn expression. How far has the experiment progressed? Why hasn't Lord Sereth been removed from the ley line yet? As soon as the chief uttered these words, Faden felt a loud buzzing in his head, stumbling twice and nearly falling. Sure enough. It was about Lord Sereth's disappearance. Lord Sereth, was he trapped in the ley line? Or had he entered it in the form of a full-fledged flesh and blood entity? How on earth did he do that? Why did this happen? Gallagher didn't bother explaining, his gaze fixed on the situation below. He muttered to himself, Couldn't Mr. Turing's rescue plan save this guy? Seraph, standing nearby, completely unaware of what was happening, Curly pleaded blankly to the black-robed chief, Sir Gallagher, their crazy experiment will collapse our entire mine. Please stop this farce immediately. Shield nearly fainted from the foolish remark. The black-robed chief slowly turned his head, glancing at the young mid-level spellcaster with a puzzled expression. He raised his hand and swung out a long whip of black smoke, wrapping the man around the waist. He hurled him backwards, sending him flying out of the mine like a cannonball. Why did you bring this useless kid into this important event? Shield froze in his tracks, stammering, unable to explain. After all, he himself was considered useless here. The two men waited a moment longer from their perch, finally seeing the spatial rift hovering above the magic circle stabilize. The illusory figure, enveloped in tentacles, gradually solidified. Several translucent, visible tentacles of psychic energy slowly emanated from its body, rapidly reaching into the magic circle below, connecting with the ever-shifting runes. However, the violent currents of magical energy made these tentacles incredibly fragile, like spider silk teetering in a gust of wind, vulnerable to snapping at any moment. Gallagher, observing this, immediately declared, "Let's go down and see if we can help." With that, he cast a flying spell and descended directly toward the mine below, his shield quickly following suit. As the two men landed, the bloodline warriors surrounding Harvey immediately disbanded their human wall, revealing Harvey, who had opened his eyes and completed his guided meditation. "Sir Gallagher? What brings you here? Are you worried about my rescue plan?" Harvey, manipulating his soul puppet, greeted the legendary chief with a smile as if he were an equal. The black-robed chief, with a rare hint of embarrassment, had indeed been concerned, having secretly returned to Alea 2 days prior. Furthermore, even with the support of the mysterious organization behind the forum, how could he and Dawson truly abandon such a crucial matter as rescuing the first chief of the Federation? Ahem. I've worked with Salus for decades, and I'm genuinely concerned about his situation. But it seems things are progressing smoothly at the moment, so my trip was in vain. Harvey smiled without saying anything. He raised his hand and pointed at the magic circle at the center of the energy formation, dispersing the spiritual tendrils that enveloped the figure, revealing the tall, pale-bearded legendary chief within, the Scorching Lord, Chemo Salus. The legendary spellcaster's eyes were closed, seemingly still in a deep meditative state. Having just undergone a reverse physical transfer, his magical and mental reserves had apparently been depleted, requiring the energy formation to continuously provide him with abundant magical energy to awaken him. Gallagher breathed a sigh of relief and expressed his sincere gratitude to Harvey. "Please convey my gratitude to Mr. Turing. The Federation will surely remember the Forum's kind assistance in rescuing Lord Serathus, as well as your own assistance, Mr. Kelthuzid. According to the Forum's principle of equivalent exchange, what is our price this time?" Harvey immediately produced a thin list from his pocket and handed it to Gallagher with a smile. "Don't be so polite. This is both a gesture of goodwill from the Forum and a business that strictly adheres to equivalent exchange. This is the equipment and materials used in this rescue operation, as well as the corresponding technicians' commissions. I've provided a detailed price list. Please settle directly in gold pounds. If you're facing funding difficulties, I'll also accept a deduction in the form of potions, plants, and magical materials." As soon as he finished speaking, the burning overlord, who had been floating in the center of the magic circle, pretending to be dead, immediately opened his eyes and couldn't help but laugh and curse. "Damn you little idiot, your mind is full of business. Are you so impatient to charge us? Or are you measuring the value of my life with such vulgar money? You might as well just sell me out." Chapter 277 The Trap Beast and the Truth. "So, you're saying that even if Serath successfully returns to reality, he'll have to be permanently connected to these bizarre magical devices, and if separated, he'll instantly die from magic exhaustion." Although they'd previously briefly discussed the follow-up to a successful rescue, Gallagher still found it hard to accept when Harvey finally confirmed the outcome. This was like being imprisoned and completely deprived of freedom. Having the Union's leader shackled by magic was not only a complete humiliation to his pride, but also a significant loss to the Union. The loss of a legendary spellcaster in the magical capital of Alea would be a significant blow to the current conflict between the Union and the Church. Harvey was helpless. There were no large veins of magicite beneath Alea's aerospace region. Relying solely on a large amount of magicite to power a planetary energy array to provide the Scorching Overlord with mana was simply unrealistic. It was like raising a shark in a fish tank. The Union, currently under attack from both sides, couldn't afford such a massive consumption of high-level magicite. The Burning Overlord, however, remained unfazed. He sighed and chuckled, "Saving my life is the best outcome for me. Besides, my soul dissociation disorder has been almost completely controlled thanks to this daring experiment. I won't have to worry about my lifespan for a long time to come." Soul dissociation disorder? Harvey subconsciously glanced at Mr. Shield, remembering a rumor he and Mr. Son of Flame had casually mentioned during a forum chat about this legendary chief. Many years ago, while analyzing a unique 9-ring spell, this Eurasian chief had suffered a serious damage to his magic pattern due to an unexpected failure. Although the legendary spellcaster's immense power managed to heal this damaged soul, the after effects of this trauma were the occasional manifestation of multiple personalities due to fluctuations in mental power and the dissipation of mana within his body. In short, Mr. Burning Overlord, due to an unexpected experiment, had unfortunately developed a transcendental form of schizophrenia, so severe that he could even play landlord with himself. This led to a ludicrous yet tragic situation. After becoming a schizophrenic trinity, the legendary chief's lifespan was evenly divided between his 3 fragmented souls. Even if his exceptional talent allowed him to surpass the 300-year lifespan limit for human spellcasters, he wouldn't have many years left to live after being so divided. The Scorching Overlord was now connected to the massive central magic circle by dozens of energy lines, confining his movements to this tiny area. This presented a new problem: how to break free from these terrifying magical shackles and regain his freedom. Mr. Turing and Mr. Neumann, we have no clue yet. You should all know, as I do, that the Forum, while mysterious and powerful, is not omniscient and almighty, Harvey explained patiently. Gallagher nodded in understanding. Even if a solution to the Scorching Overlord's current predicament could be found, it was unclear whether the Federation could afford the cost. This wasn't like the money-hungry Mr. Kilthuzid. The mysterious beings behind the Forum couldn't be easily dispelled with mere glittering coins. Seeing the 2 Union leaders each imprint their own unique magic emblems on the expense list, Harvey smiled and took it, shoving it into his pocket. "I'll continue to send people over to add a few more magic supplied devices for Mr. Scorching Overlord, but for now, magic stone mining in this mine must be halted. Any activity that affects the magic fluctuations of the magic stone veins must be strictly prohibited." Upon hearing this, Fadden quickly memorized these follow-up requirements mentioned by Harvey. This would probably be his main responsibility for the next period of time. Seraph chuckled and said self-deprecatingly, "From now on, I'll be like those subspecies dragons of ancient times, living in this dark underground mine. Fortunately, I have the magic brain device provided by the Forum to use for entertainment, otherwise I would be really bored." Harvey called for people to start cleaning up the scene and comforted him in a gentle voice. "Chief, there's no need to be so dejected. As long as the Forum exists, we will find a way to rescue you. I will also keep an eye on this problem and try to find a perfect solution." The black-robed Chief Gallagher muttered loudly, "I wonder how many gold pounds it will cost?" If the Federation had known this, they shouldn't have fought so hard to seize the magic stone mines in the Evil Moon Mountains. They should have sent troops to Isengard directly to seize a gold mine. Isengard, the Kingdom of the Knights, is a secular kingdom famous for its gold mines. However, it has always been firmly controlled by the Church of Light, and the Federation has never been able to intervene. After all, gold is a key material for making divine artifacts. Harvey chuckled twice, politely bidding the 2 chiefs adieu. Then, accompanied by Fashield, he left the underground mine and returned to the Union's outpost outside the surface mining area. He would need to use the continental teleportation array there to pass through Daius and then sneak back to Jackdaw Town. The situation in St. Valen was currently tense, and all Union branches within the area had been evacuated. Away from the ever-present pressure and gazes of the 2 legendary spellcasters, Fashield relaxed considerably and began chatting with Harvey familiarly. "Mr. Kilthuzid, I didn't expect this matter to be so secretive. I hadn't received any specific information before arriving here. It can't be helped. After all, if word of the chief's disappearance and entrapment spread within the Union, it would likely cause unrest. If the Church learned of it, it would undoubtedly lead to further complications." Shield couldn't help but think that if the news leaked out, the church would immediately dispatch powerful forces to ambush near the mining area, launching a surprise attack and disrupting the rescue operation at a critical moment. The situation would immediately deteriorate, causing the already perilous rescue operation to fail completely. Fortunately, Mr. Kilthuzad was well prepared and experienced, and fortunately, Lord Gallagher secretly returned to Alea to prevent any accidents. With his heart at ease, Shield easily changed the subject, discussing the recent plague outbreak in St. Verin and the request he had made to Harvey to treat and care for Mr. Son of Fire's nephew. I heard that young Mandert has officially started working for you, Mr. Kilthuzad. Please keep him in good stead. This guy, Fel, is the only talented young man his family has produced in recent years. Even more worrying was that this one talented young man had chosen not to follow the traditional family tradition of becoming a battle mage, but rather, surprisingly, to become a research spellcaster. He preferred to idle away his time in the Union branch of a small secular principality like St. Valen rather than strive for advancement. This truly brought the Son of Fire, who had always considered him his own, to the point of nearly vomiting blood. Harvey, somewhat amused, said, Mr. Dirt truly has no interest in combat spellcasting, and he's not actively seeking work in magical experiments and research with me. He seems to prefer staying at my magic academy, teaching the apprentices their basic magical skills. Shield was speechless upon hearing this, suffocated by the choice of this lay-down young man. Chapter 278 The technology tree is wrong. After returning to the frontier territory, Harvey, having exhausted himself rescuing the Scorching Overlord, took a full week off, abandoning his official duties and experimental projects. He spent his days in the castle reading magical biographies or playing adventure games on the Magic Net forums. 4 days later, the Union delivered the first batch of magical materials to offset the rescue costs via the Magic Net teleportation array, hundreds of boxes of frigid black iron, weighing perhaps tens of tons. This was undoubtedly another item the Union had borrowed from the Alchemy Exploration Society. Ever since the Exploration Society switched to the precision machining and assembly of the Lance of Annihilation, the production of the cheap, mass-produced standard magical instruments had long ceased, leaving the mountains of magical ore and auxiliary materials completely useless. Harvey had only previously learned about this common magical metal from his basic materials studies at the Magic Academy, but wasn't fully familiar with its specific uses. He therefore sent for Chris, a master of material identification. The director of the alchemy laboratory came hurriedly and looked at the piles of refined black iron ingots being sorted and carried by the guards and alchemy beasts. He clicked his tongue in disdain and turned to Harvey and said, My lord, the Federation is obviously being perfunctory in doing this. Arctic black iron is the least valuable magical mineral. Even if it is used to cast protective magical tools, the anti-magic effect is almost negligible. He took the shipping list handed over by Harvey and found that it was stamped with the official pricing mark, with a total value of about 10,000 gold pounds. Only then did he put away his dissatisfaction a little and muttered, but their quotation is reasonable. If this batch of goods goes through formal channels, it will be worth about 12,000 gold pounds. We are not at a disadvantage. Harvey picked up a black iron ingot and held it in his hand. He found that it was not heavy at all, but it was extremely cold to the touch, and he could intuitively feel the magical properties contained in it. Besides forging low-level magical tools, is there no other use for this mineral? If I mix it with ordinary metal ores and use it to mass-produce parts for alchemical beasts, that shouldn't be a problem, right? Chris laughed. Sir, that's a bit extravagant. While Arctic black iron's magical conductivity is mediocre, it's the primary material for the Dragon Flame Spear. We could emulate the Alchemy Quest Society and produce a batch of finished products, selling them to the Evil Moon Mountains through the Dragonstone Merchant Guild. Harvey knew that compared to his own magical energy spears and annihilation spears, the Alchemy Quest's Dragon Flame Spear was, at best, a firecracker tube, a hollow, slender, bamboo-like structure filled with dragon flame powder, compacted, and then ignited by its own magic power, blasting outwards high-temperature magical flames. It was little more than a cheap magical flamethrower with a very short range. Low-level battle mages wielding dragon flame spears would typically only use them in close combat against demonic warriors in group battles. The reason for choosing frigid black iron for the dragon flame spear, besides its low cost, is its primary advantage, its inherent icy effect, preventing the dragon flame powder from melting the barrel and turning it into a single-use weapon. In other words, Frigid black iron possesses remarkable heat resistance, and the metal's ductility during the smelting process also makes it easily forged and press cast into a hollow iron tube. Chris's explanation sparked a brilliant idea for Harvey. He might as well try forging a cannon with this stuff. But Harvey wasn't planning on creating a typical medieval flintlock or bronze cannon. After all, dragon flame, an alchemical powder infused with magical substances, far surpassed ordinary gunpowder in both power and stability. Having arrived in a magical world where extraordinary powers existed, he naturally couldn't adhere to the scientific notions of his previous life. Chasing headlong towards the top of this magical world's long-deflected technological tree was the correct choice to keep pace with the times. Chris's alchemy lab had a dedicated magic weapon manufacturing team stationed year-round at the magic weapons factory, working alongside the workhorse alchemy beasts to mass-produce magic guns and ammunition. They also handled minor repairs and scrapping of guns. Harvey had Chris immediately assign them to these teams, and they began intensively developing a new type of magic energy beam explosive. To forge a transcendental version of the cannon, they naturally needed to create its loading shells. Liquid magic energy, already readily available for mass production and canned in cans, was Harvey's primary experimental target. Unlike solid, cast iron cannonballs, liquid magic energy encapsulated in enchanted iron cans couldn't be used to infer the barrel's caliber from the round's weight. Harvey had to abandon his previous life's common sense and instead test the energy and impact of its explosion to determine the most suitable launcher model. The test site was set up outside the territory's walls, in a pre-cleared valley in the woods. Large, solid rocks provided shelter on all sides, ensuring the safety of the experiment. When Harvey arrived with several of the Lord's personal guards and officers from the Northern Army, Chris had already led a group of alchemy apprentices to complete the preliminary preparations for the experiment. A cylindrical, barrel-shaped magic energy tank, roughly the size of an American football, was placed in the center of the clearing. Metal plates of equal thickness were erected at intervals of 1, 5, and 10 meters around the tank, and small, pre-captured beasts were tied behind the plates. To detonate the liquid magic energy within the tank, ignition was not an option. Instead, a thin, conductive metal hose was connected, allowing a spellcaster to remotely inject their own magic energy into the tank, triggering the detonation through energy conduction. The principle was simple: once pure liquid magic energy came into contact with or mixed with other magic energy contaminated with elemental or anomalous energies, it immediately lost its stability, transforming into a violent, turbulent stream of energy that erupted from the enchanted tank. This unique phenomenon, discovered long ago by Harvey while researching beetle ore, was perfectly suited for use as a detonation mechanism for mana. Chris volunteered to be in charge of the detonation. Alchemists are also spellcasters, having used his study of fire magic since childhood to supplement his alchemical studies and experiments. The mana hose stretched for nearly 150 meters. After repeatedly estimating the distance, Harvey ordered Chris to begin channeling elemental magic. Following the Lord's instructions, everyone crouched behind two finger-thick metal shields, quietly awaiting the effects of the distant mana explosion. Vaughn and Duff were also summoned to observe the weapons test, but they viewed the scene with considerable disapproval. At such a distance, even a direct shot from the mana rifle wouldn't likely penetrate the layers of thick metal shielding. The Lord was being overly cautious, completely unnecessary. The early winter dirt ground was icy cold. The two orc officers, clad only in thin military uniforms, could feel the chill creeping through their padded jackets. Vaughn instinctively twisted his body, attempting to activate his bloodstream, stimulating circulation and warming his body. Suddenly, he heard a teeth-grinding sound of metal tearing in the distance, followed by a shattered metal shield swishing overhead, plunging into the earth behind him in a parabola. Two other defense officers crouched beside them, their shields struck by an equally sharp fragment of metal, with a resounding clang. "All right, we can lift the shields now. Everyone, get up," the Lord's voice echoed from a distance, and everyone rose and emerged from behind the shields. When Harvey led them to the explosion site in the center of the clearing, they discovered the devastation, as if ravaged by some kind of mass bombardment. Of the closest metal plates, only a short section remained stuck in the ground, the rest shattered and scattered. The plates 5 meters away were in better condition, but they were also riddled with holes from the violent energy beam. The plates just 10 meters away showed no signs of shattering, but were also blasted through the ground by the energy shockwave, landing about 10 meters away. All the small beasts tethered behind the plates were killed, either blasted beyond recognition or shattered to death through the metal plates, their bodies bleeding profusely. Harvey gazed at the scene with satisfaction. It seemed his cannon-making plan could be successfully implemented. Chapter 279 Magic Power Cannon. 3 days later, at the magical weapons factory next to the Lord's castle, two thick, jet-black cannon barrels, their surfaces engraved with countless tiny symbols and inscriptions, sat in the center of an open workshop. Following the previous explosion tests of the magic energy beam explosive, Harvey had Chris repeat dozens of test explosions, finally finding the appropriate explosive yield and, from that, calculating the precise caliber of the cannon. The liquid magic energy contained within the enchanted iron canister needed to be infused with a mixture of anomalous magic to trigger an energy frenzy. Therefore, Harvey, drawing on the principles of artillery shell design he had learned from his previous life, had Chris create a structure that used a firing pin to impact a low-level elemental magic stone, causing it to tumble into the liquid magic energy canister, detonating the magic shell. This also allowed for a flatline firing range of over 500 meters, ensuring the shell exploded the moment it landed, inflicting maximum damage to ground targets. As for the maximum range and target positioning for elevated fire, a precise table of firing angles will need to be established through repeated test firings after the cannon and shells are installed. For now, we can ignore this. Considering the lightweight and relatively ductile nature of Arctic black iron, Harvey, at the outset of the design, simply settled on a barrel length of 1.6 meters. He then had Chris and the Iron Foundry technicians build 2 test cannons to see the results. The medieval flintlock cannons Harvey had learned about in his previous life were constructed with a wood core wrapped in curved iron plates. Iron hoops were welded to reinforce the barrel, and the wood filling was burned off to create a hollow, spliced barrel. The process was similar to that of a barrel with iron hoops, except that the joints needed to be fused as tightly as possible using iron powder and iron bars. However, the risk of barrel explosion was unavoidable, resulting in a high scrap rate during use. Fortunately, the alchemists of this magical world had mastered the art of integral metal casting centuries ago. All they had to do was cast a heavy, solid iron pillar, then use a metal corrosive alchemical solution to completely dissolve the core, leaving a single, hollow barrel. Harvey couldn't help but admire the extraordinary powers of these magical scientists. They were able to create the prototype of his ideal cannon with such precision, relying solely on a simple design sketch and a verbal description of the principles. Harvey personally measured the barrel's inner diameter with an iron caliper, finding the wall thickness to be remarkably uniform, devoid of the uneven, and bumpy conditions he'd imagined. Finally, the technicians meticulously polished the barrel's exterior, preparing it for Chris's subsequent engraving of magical inscriptions. Looking at the 2 magical barrels, their deep black exteriors, covered in strange runic patterns and exuding a rich, earthy aura, Harvey felt immensely satisfied. Soon they arrived at the test firing range outside the territory's city walls. The first light snow of early winter had begun to fall. The early winter sleet made the dirt roads outside the city incredibly slippery and muddy, but the Arctic black iron was lighter than ordinary refined iron, allowing a single alchemical camel to easily pull it up and quickly transport it to the forested valley without much effort. Transporting the magical shells required much greater caution. To prevent the shells from accidentally exploding due to collisions and falls during transportation, which could cause the entire shell box to explode, Harvey had Chris design a special safety device for the shells. The safety device worked very simply. A pin inserted from the outside penetrated a shell, locking the firing pin securely in place. As long as the pin was not removed from the shell with special pliers, even if the shell was dropped, it would not explode. As usual, Vorndaf and other territorial officers were called in to watch the weapons experiment. They had become accustomed to the new gadgets that the Lord would come up with from time to time. They wore thick winter training uniforms for officers, stood in a line with their sleeves rolled up, and whispered to the side. "What new thing has the Lord come up with this time?" Dave poked Vaughn, who was standing like a javelin, with his elbow. "It looks like a big iron pillar." Smart guy Tommy had vaguely heard rumors about new weapons, and said firmly, "What big iron pillar?" "This is a super magic gun. It requires 2 bloodline warriors to carry it and fire it. One shot can blow the demon tribe's huge mounted monsters as big as a hill into meat scraps." Vaughn couldn't help but open his mouth in surprise, and said in a daze, "Then we have to carry this big iron pillar when we go out to fight in the future. A large magic gun? Isn't it too heavy?" Dave chuckled and rubbed his hands, expectantly. Hey, I'll go to ask the Lord later and try to see if I can carry it alone. I don't think it's a big problem. Daily training for the Bloodline warriors often involves carrying massive tree trunks weighing hundreds of pounds across their territory for long marches. Those who have awakened the great strength talent can even carry a 100-pound tree trunk on each shoulder and still run at the front of the group. The discussion grew a little louder, immediately catching the attention of Pierce, who was standing next to Harvey. He turned and sternly scolded, "Fools! Shut up and look. This is a magic cannon designed by Lord Harvey. It's countless times more powerful than those hemp-stocked magic guns you have." Harvey smiled and shook his head. In a sense, the magic cannon and the magic gun share similar principles. It could be described as a larger, super-magnetic magic gun. Drawing on his experience playing medieval war games, he designed a metal carriage with wheels for the magic cannon, allowing for easy transport while also allowing it to be secured for firing. Since the magic cannon's firing is completely recoilless, there's no need for complex recoil control mechanisms. Chris was also in charge of the gun testing, though Pierce was also needed to assist him. Harvey had compiled a specially adapted firing procedure based on his memories of his past life and the characteristics of the monocannon, and had them familiarize themselves with it beforehand. Now was the perfect time to see the results. Chris excitedly peeled back the tarpaulin covering the cannon, then pulled a long mop from a slot beneath the mount and, grinning, thrust it into the muzzle. Liquid mana ammunition didn't leave residue in the barrel like gunpowder did. Harvey's insistence on including this step simply satisfied his unique sense of ritual and commemoration for the long-range weapon that had changed the course of war in his past life. Chris fiddled with it vigorously for a few seconds, then pulled the mop out, clean and spotless. The commemoration was finally complete, to Harvey's satisfaction. Pierce then turned and addressed the territorial officers lined up behind him. "Do you understand? Remember the procedure perfectly. Don't slack off." Everyone stared at the two men's movements, nodding their heads in agreement. Next, Chris pulled a cylindrical canister shell from a box behind the gun carriage and inserted it through the raised muzzle. With a soft thud, the shell slid into the bottom of the barrel. Pierce immediately moved to the rear of the cannon and opened a small, covered hole in the barrel. He inserted a pair of hooked pliers, hooked the safety pin on the shell, and gently twisted it to remove it. He then closed the cover and nodded to Chris, indicating that the preliminary firing procedures for the cannon were complete. To prevent any accidents, everyone retreated 30 meters behind a metal shield 2 fingers thick and 1 person tall. Only Chris and Pierce remained. Upon receiving Harvey's signal to fire, Chris firmly twisted a metal lever at the rear of the cannon, and the inscriptions engraved on the barrel slowly illuminated. Then, a low humming sound echoed. From the muzzle, a stream of air, thick with magical energy, erupted at high speed, whipping up the surrounding air and drifting snowflakes, creating a lightning-fast trajectory that flew away. This magical cannon, constructed according to the principles of a flint cannon, theoretically had a projectile range of over 1,000 meters, but firing flat on target would have the distance. The trajectory of the magic shell was instantly undetectable to the naked eye, but a massive piece of metal plate placed 500 meters away instantly exploded with a resounding metallic tearing sound, shattering into pieces in an instant, sending up a cloud of dust. Harvey led the group to the target location. They saw that, save for a short section deeply embedded in the ground, the rest of the plate had completely shattered and shattered. The furthest fragment had even embedded itself deeply in a tree trunk, requiring significant effort to extract. The ground and trees within a 10-meter radius of the target were riddled with holes caused by turbulent energy beams, indicating that the magic shell had unleashed its full energy impact upon detonation. "Wow, such terrifying power," Vaughn muttered in disbelief. He approached a thick, ripped tree trunk and observed the holes. He could already imagine the spectacular sight of this shell landing among the enemy as they gathered and charged. Chris, who had participated in the entire firing and construction of the magic cannon, was particularly excited. He directed his apprentices to busily begin recording various data points. He then walked over to Harvey and exclaimed ecstatically, "My lord, this is a sheer genius. If we increase the caliber of the cannon and create a magic shell with a higher yield, even if we were to confront the ancient dragons head-on, I'm afraid those divine creatures wouldn't be able to withstand the power of our blast." Harvey rolled his eyes speechlessly. As expected, alchemists who also practiced fire magic were all fanatics of caliber and yield. He was already imagining using magic weapons to fight the ancient dragons. He was right, though. Although the cannon before him was a modified long-range weapon, it still adhered to an absolutely classic principle: caliber is justice, range is truth, and yield is dignity. Chapter 280 Artillery Selection. Shan Meo had been feeling incredibly anxious the past few days, struggling to eat and sleep. He'd also made numerous missteps during daytime training, earning several public reprimands from his direct superiors. As a squad leader in the Territorial Defense Force, this was an unacceptable mistake. If he continued like this, he'd likely be forced to undergo a self-criticism. He'd only just completed literacy training, and writing a self-criticism would be a horrific ordeal, physically and mentally. All of this was due to a strange order issued by the military a week ago. The Lord had decided to select a group of exceptionally capable enlisted soldiers and junior officers from the Defense Force and the Northern Army to form a special combat unit. At Shan Meo's initiative, the battalion commander, who had always held him in high regard, placed his name on the shortlist. However, 2 or 3 days after submitting the list, he still hadn't received any response, which was making him increasingly uneasy. On a day off, he met with several familiar squad leaders at the officers' club, quietly discussing the recruitment of new troops. They happened to run into Ti Tao, a man who had been transferred from the Northern Army to serve as deputy captain of the Lord's personal guard. Although a half-orc officer, Ti Tao had undergone a bloodline awakening ritual bestowed by the Lord himself, becoming a formidable and exceptional warrior gifted with Ice bloodline. He was highly respected within the army, and no one dared to discriminate against his mixed-race identity. Although the Defense Forces and the Northern Army had always been at odds, Ti Tao, a Northern Army veteran, had, by chance, become Shan Meo's brother-in-law. His gentle and beautiful younger sister, through a chance encounter, had fallen for the unsightly half-orc officer, forcing Shan Meo to grit his teeth and accept the bewildered marriage. "Hi. My dear brother-in-law," Ironhead, a half-orc with a stern face and a warm heart, approached with a glass of pale beer. He casually thrust his butt forward and squeezed a spacious seat for himself. "Why are you hanging out at the club so early? Why don't you come with me to pick up Dinah from get off work? We're going to the convenience market tonight to pick up wedding items." "My sweet Dinah, I want a lady's silk hat imported from the south." The other team leaders' faces twitched from stifling laughter. Lynx clutched his glass tightly, not wanting to burst out. He stared at Ironhead's face, half scarred by flames, in fear and speechlessness. The burns were from a fireball spewed by a demonic beast during a battle. They were both ugly scars and a testament to his honor. Of course, even if he hadn't been disfigured, his original appearance would have been far from handsome. God bless him. I hope my sister and this guy don't give birth to a daughter after marriage, otherwise he will really cry for help. Bobcat sighed resignedly and explained in a low voice, "We met here to discuss privately the Lord's establishment of a new army. Do you know any gossip that can be revealed? I haven't received a reply from the military, and I haven't even slept well these days." Ti Tao squinted and chuckled, raised his hand and snapped his fingers, and squeezed out a crystal snowflake from his fingertips and fell into the beer glass, making his drink immediately become cool and refreshing. He put his huge head close to the crowd, pouting his big mouth with fangs, and whispered mysteriously, "The new army will be equipped with a new weapon developed by the Lord himself. It is 100 times more powerful than the magic gun. I can't say more, remember the confidentiality regulations, a new weapon that is more powerful than the magic gun?" Bobcat was startled and asked quickly, "Is there any news beyond the confidentiality regulations? What are the selection requirements? What about the salary and benefits? Will bloodline warriors like you be more easily selected? Do ordinary soldiers and officers like us still have a chance?" The series of questions made Ti Tao stunned. After gulping down a few big gulps of light beer, he burped and came back to his senses. "The Lord said that this batch of new troops, bloodline warriors, are not among the selected ones, and only ordinary soldiers like you will be selected. Alice, I also want to try the powerful new weapons." Bobcat glanced at his other colleagues and found that they all had joy on their faces. Without this group of extraordinary monsters participating in the selection competition, the chances of him and others being selected would have greatly increased. In any case, the military would not be completely biased towards the Northern Army, and some places had to be reserved for the Defense Army. Now, Bobcat had completely put this ill-fated marriage behind him. He found his half-blood brother-in-law much more pleasing to the eye. He warmly put his arm around his shoulders, acting like an older brother-in-law and saying softly, Spend more time with Dina on your days off. As the Lord's personal guard, you're often busy with official duties and can't spare time. He changed the subject and immediately whispered, "The new weapon developed by the Lord himself, what on earth is it?" Before he could finish his words, the door to the club was banged open. A defense soldier rushed in with a stack of documents. He rushed straight to their table and shouted happily, "Captain Bobcat! Captain Thor! You two have been selected." Joining the newly formed artillery battalion certainly didn't disappoint Shanmeo. While he could no longer carry his magic rifle and wear the crisp uniform of the defense force, marching daily from the barracks through the territory's residential streets, receiving the admiring gazes of the residents along the way, Shanmeo's salary had at least increased significantly, jumping from 120 gold yuan per month to 160 gold yuan, almost catching up with the defense force's battalion commander. The new weapon, dubbed the magic power cannon, was indeed incredibly powerful. Shanmeo felt that the Lord's selection of this group of men to form a new army and operate such a powerful weapon was a testament to his outstanding performance and his Lord's appreciation. However, the subsequent training was a bit too rigorous and tedious. A single magical power cannon required the coordinated operation of 6 men, 2 to man the gun and 4 to maintain vigilance. Shanmeo, having previously served as a squad leader in the defense force, was directly assigned to lead an artillery unit. Compared to the magic guns that could be fired with a single lift, this heavy vessel was far more complex to operate. For nearly a month, they were denied the opportunity to handle a real cannon, instead forced to practice with mock cannon models fashioned from thick tree trunks. They repeated the same routine daily. They piloted the alchemical camel to the designated firing position, secured a mount, raised the muzzle with a joystick, checked the ammunition box for ammunition, cleaned the barrel, loaded the shells, released the safety catch with special pliers, confirmed the impact point 3 times with a firing scale, and then prepared to fire. The entire training process was conducted with impeccable coordination and precise timing, ensuring the completion of the training within the allotted time frame. Any misstep or discrepancy in the procedure would result in a stern reprimand from Sergeant Pierce, who personally led the training. Any failure in training more than 3 times during the day would result in a harsh reprimand in front of the entire battalion during the evening theoretical training session, and a 300-word self-reflection report would be submitted before lights out. This was the form of punishment that Bobcat feared the most, so he was extremely nervous and focused during daily training. Even after falling asleep at night, he would mutter to himself in his dreams, "Raise the muzzle. Check the ammunition. Clean the barrel. Load the ammunition." He just didn't know when he would have the chance to touch a real magic-powered cannon and taste the sensation of live ammunition. Chapter 281 Live Fire Training. The magic-powered artillery live fire training everyone had been eagerly anticipating was quickly scheduled. However, the training grounds were moved from the military training grounds to an open riverbank outside the newly built Garrison Corps fortress on the east bank of the ice-filled river. Lynx, perched on a camel-drawn artillery carriage, followed the artillery battalion's troops as they slowly crossed the newly opened, spacious ice-filled river bridge. Faintly, he could see the newly reclaimed, fertile black soil on the other side, where numerous large agricultural alchemists were still busy plowing the fields. Fortunately, he had applied when the Garrison Corps was formed but was not selected. His family was too small to meet the requirement of relocating to the East Coast. However, this was a blessing in disguise, giving him the opportunity to join the artillery battalion with better benefits. Bicyclists constantly crossed a bridge, stopping to observe and curiously examining the four-wheeled artillery carriage covered by a tarpaulin. The 6 artillery teams were quickly brought to the riverbank. After a brief wait, a massive, unmanned metal vessel arrived from the downstream dock. This was the steel icebreaker that plying the territory and the valley outpost daily. It was said to be powered by magic, requiring no sails at all, capable of swiftly traversing the thinly frozen river. The icebreaker slowly passed through the river before them, its crew waving and dropping strange objects into the water. "Captain, what are they doing? Aren't icebreakers used to transport soldiers and supplies to and from the outpost? Why are they casting nets upstream today?" Lynx, a desert refugee with excellent eyesight, squinted for a moment before realizing they weren't casting nets, but rather large red buoys dropped into the river at intervals. Commander Pierce also spoke at the right moment, unveiling the details of today's live fire training. Their targets were the anchored buoys floating in the middle of the river. The artillery battalion's current position on the riverbank was approximately 800 meters away. This was a distance beyond the reach of the artillery's direct fire. They had to use an elevated projectile to hit the target. "Sir, this is to test our accuracy." Lynx suddenly came to his senses, realizing the main purpose of today's live fire training. The enemy wouldn't just sit there and wait for their attack like these targets. Once the battle began, they would have to master the artillery's angles, aiming each precious magical shell precisely into the dense enemy formation, striving for maximum kill efficiency. Magical shells were expensive, making live fire training a precious opportunity. Each artillery member had mastered the procedures for setting up the gun positions and loading the shells to such an extent that they could practically guarantee no mistakes. Commander Pierce quickly called on Lynx's first artillery group to conduct the test fire. Lynx expertly removed the gun sight and inserted it into the rear sight. Squinting one eye, he peered through the firing port on the sight. His hand swiftly adjusted the gun's muzzle, tilting the joystick until the red boy in the middle of the river was perfectly centered in the firing port. He felt his palms drip with sweat, and the joystick slipped slightly. He quickly rubbed it against his uniform, then glanced at the rest of his crew and nodded. Signaling readiness. Loaded, aim, safety on, fire. At the commander's command, Lynx pulled the cannon's firing lever with all his might. A deep humming sound erupted. A stream of scorching hot air erupted from the muzzle, and the projectile, whose trajectory was indiscernible to the naked eye, flew towards the river like lightning. With a resounding bang, a plume of water rose 2 or 3 meters high to the left of the red boy. From a distance, it looked as if the river had suddenly boiled. Then, a chunk of the boy's pointed tip suddenly vanished, as if sliced horizontally by something. Commander Pierce, whose eyesight far surpassed that of an ordinary soldier, coldly announced the final results of the live fire exercise. The impact point was off by 3 meters. The energy beam of the shell slightly impacted the target. Training evaluation failed. Each artillery crew then completed a round of training. Only one team managed to pass, but they didn't quite hit the boy itself, instead landing within a meter of it. The sheer force of the explosion sent it flying out of the water, shattering it to pieces. When it was Lynx's turn, the 2 alchemist apprentices who accompanied them came forward and replaced their guns with a new set of marks. Lynx took them in his hands and examined them carefully, noticing that a number of half-number markings had been added to the original whole number scale. From 500, 600, 700, to 550, 600, 650. Though he didn't understand why, following his superior's instructions was a sure thing. As Commander Pierce shouted, "Fire angle 850, Lynx quickly cranked a muzzle lever, repositioning the red boy into the designated firing port. Another shot fired, this time firmly hitting the red boy drifting in the river, shattering it almost instantly, leaving no larger fragments. Another round of shooting practice, and this time, except for one unlucky group, all the other artillery crews received passing grades. Lynx gradually understood the principle of aiming and hitting the target. The greater the muzzle angle, the longer the range, and the smaller the number spacing on the shooting scale, the higher the chance of hitting the target. Looking at the ammunition box at his feet, which was full of 12 magic energy shells, with 2 newly expended shell slots now empty, Lynx felt a mixture of excitement and pain. He'd heard the logistics officers delivering their artillery shells complain privately. It was said that producing each magical shell required enough liquid mana to power an off-road magic scooter for half a day's high-speed travel. Converted into gold, the value was likely over 1,000 gold pieces. This meant that every round fired by these men cost them the equivalent of half a year's salary, a fact that made Bobcat feel incredibly apprehensive. Harvey sat in his study, reviewing the live fire training report Pierce had sent him, and couldn't help but sigh in pain. A single firing exercise consumed 24 magical shells. The military factories and alchemical laboratories had been working overtime for several days, but had only managed to produce fewer than 300 shells. A few more drills would likely deplete their ammunition reserves. The hundreds of boxes of Arctic black iron sent by the Union were used to forge 20 magically powered cannons. The process of casting the entire barrel and then using alchemical elixirs to create a single-piece barrel inherently wastes a significant amount of material. Developing the military industry is indeed the most expensive business in the world. Harvey and the Pioneer Territory still have a long way to go to achieve the terrifying war effect of a magical artillery firestorm. Chapter 282 Harvey's 3 Sins. Another half-month later, the Union delivered the second batch of commissions for the rescue operation. This time, they finally didn't accept a jumble of magical materials as payment, but rather 10 neatly stacked boxes of Orland gold coins. The human kingdoms and dwarven elves of the southern continent each had their own distinct monetary systems. The 7 wizarding kingdoms, led by the human race, and dozens of other secular kingdoms, large and small, each had several independently minted and issued currencies. However, in terms of liquidity and currency value, Orland, the most powerful of the 7 wizarding kingdoms, and Isengard, the secular kingdom with its rich gold reserves, were the most popular. This meant that Orland and Isengard gold coins, each with a face value of 1 gold pound, were virtually equivalent and freely circulated throughout the southern continent, enjoying the highest acceptance. However, gold pounds from other nations had to be exchanged for a certain amount of fire cost, making a one-to-one exchange impossible. Even the legally minted coins of some small vassal counties and duchies were completely unacceptable to many of the major southern chambers of commerce and banks. Harvey was deeply pleased with the Federation's generosity. He had initially requested a whopping 100,000 British pounds for the rescue, expecting the Federation to haggle over the price or settle with some inferior materials. Instead, he received a full 30,000 British pounds in gold coins as a second payment. He had already earned around 30,000 British pounds in revenue from the previous vaccine deal, and this near-zero-cost rescue operation involved only a little over 10,000 British pounds in energy array equipment and materials, translating to a net profit of nearly 90,000 British pounds. This sudden revival of the City Hall's already struggling finances had even Reiner's tone lightened with joy during his work report. However, the joy of the harvest didn't last long, as 2 pieces of news from the southern border, delivered by Asdalin, rekindled Harvey's anger. "My lord, when we were doing epidemic prevention work in Jackdaw Town some time ago, those petty nobles who were temporarily detained by us in the town and had their personal freedom restricted, actually jointly reported the matter to Earl Figan of Grizzly Castle and the Royal Court of Golden City, that is, His Majesty the Grand Duke of St. Valen," Harvey asked puzzledly. "Didn't we only detain them for 2 days and then let them leave the town and return to their fiefdom and Grizzly Castle on their own? I didn't arrest them all." In fact, he knew very well what these petty nobles were planning. When the plague broke out, Harvey provided free epidemic prevention drugs to the people, but charged a large amount of treatment fees for these nobles. The injection fee of the drug was as high as 500 gold pounds, which would inevitably make those greedy guys resentful. But the plague potion was Harvey's creation. He could sell it for whatever he pleased, and no one could accuse him of anything. So, these petty nobles gathered together and accused Harvey of another pretext, sending troops into Jackdaw Town, Earl Figan's family territory, without the permission of His Majesty the Grand Duke and the fiefdom's lord. This constituted a serious violation of the lord's fiefdom rights. So what? Earl Figan sailed off Grizzlyburg during the outbreak, turning a blind eye to the lives of his subjects. Now, he's gathering a bunch of petty nobles to bite me back. He thinks the blow he received from me wasn't enough, right? The town's church members had been expelled back to Grizzlyburg by Harvey, but after helping Harvey control the spread of the plague, the town's Federation branch secretly returned to the safety of Dahius. Jackdaw Town was now a lawless zone. Aside from the 1,000 or so permanent residents who remained, unwilling to leave their homes, no official administrative structure existed. Harvey's staff, working in conjunction with 2 high-level forum spellcasters hidden in the shadows, had effectively taken over the town. These territory officials, formerly refugees from the wastelands, had no notion of a hierarchy between nobles and commoners. To facilitate ongoing epidemic prevention efforts and to continue accepting refugees, they had requisitioned most of the vacation villas and mansions of the town's nobles and small landowners to house the newly arrived southern refugees, still recovering from the epidemic. After all, it was winter, and living in tents at the refugee camp in this freezing weather would undoubtedly lead to freezing. Some pragmatic officials even tore down many of the empty wooden houses to generate fuel for winter heating. Their simple philosophy was simple: since no one was living there anyway, they might as well use the demolished materials for fuel. As a result, Harvey, the northern frontier lord, was undoubtedly accused of 3 serious crimes in the eyes of the other nobles. First, he sent troops to invade the neighboring fiefdoms of other superior lords without permission. Second, he allowed his subordinates to seize the private property of other nobles without reason, causing irreparable property damage. Third, He followed the order of Grand Duke St. Valen and the Church of Radiance to expel all spellcasters from the country, which naturally included Harvey, the wizard lord who held the frontier order and was outside the border. Perhaps because he had suffered a heavy loss at Harvey's hands inexplicably, resulting in the loss of many of his family's private soldiers and trusted knights, Count Figen did not immediately launch a targeted action. Instead, he slowly assembled his troops in Grizzly Castle, seemingly waiting for the church to send reinforcements before seeking the right opportunity to attack Harvey. As Dallin suggested lightly, the two spellcasters stationed in Jackdaw Town asked me to ask you if they need to go directly to Grizzly Castle and secretly deal with Earl Figen and those nobles who took the lead in the rebellion, so as to strike first. Harvey shook his head slowly and refused. No need. When the Federation branch in Grizzly Castle was secretly evacuating, it was intercepted by the Inquisition army and priests sent by the church in the city. It was almost wiped out. This shows that Earl Figen must have high-level combat power of the church under his command. There is no need for us to put ourselves in danger. Moreover, the church and the nobles now occupy the high ground of public opinion. If the spellcasters rashly attack them, they will probably be directly accused of provoking the war. Harvey does not want to bear the blame for the spellcasters and the fuse that restarted the civil war in the church. Dispatch 2 500-man battalions of Northern Army soldiers and an artillery battalion to Jackdaw Town to guard the main roads and riverbanks. This time, we'll be well rested and wait for those idiots, led by Earl Figen, to come and get us beaten. Harvey also had his guards fetch pen and paper. He personally wrote a sarcastic reply to Earl Figen, refuting the unfounded accusations against him word for word. The entire letter was permeated with a single message: don't agree, huh? If not, come and fight me. Chapter 283 The Shadow of Grizzly Castle. Damn Harvey, damn that evil wizard. He's just a necromancer with nowhere to go, forced to hide in the northern wastes to survive. How dare you provoke and mock a feudal earl like me? He deserves death. Earl Figen crumpled the letter in his hand into a ball and threw it to the ground angrily. He added a mouthful of spitting, feeling a little relieved. He took the warm towel offered by the waiter and wiped his forehead. Then he thought of his nephew, who had inexplicably died at the hands of the other man over a year ago. New and old hatred surged in his heart, and he felt furious. Just because you escaped to the northern wastes and didn't get completely devoured by the evil orcs, did you think you could gain a foothold from now on? Now that St. Valen has completely eliminated the influence of the Union that oppressed the nobles, and His Majesty the Grand Duke has openly sided with the church, let's see how long you can continue to be complacent. If the opponent wasn't a spellcasting wizard lord, and if he hadn't needed reinforcements from the church's Inquisition army arriving from Golden Radiant City to deal with him, Earl Figen would have been eager to immediately mobilize his already assembled army and march directly to Jackdaw Town, burning that lowly wizard, who only knew how to talk, at the stake. Furthermore, the church reinforcements arriving from the royal capital would also bring with them a decree from His Majesty the Grand Duke, deprive Harvey Floyd of his title as Lord of the Outback Territory and sentence this necromancer to death for spreading plague and harming the people. This decree also included a clause that delighted Earl Figen. Harvey's fiefdom in the Northern Outback Territory would be temporarily administered by Earl Figen of Grizzly Castle, pending the appointment of a new noble from the royal capital. That was the frontier territory, nestled in the northern wastes. Not only was the climate harsh and freezing, but the demonic orcs who invaded the north every winter were more than a lord could withstand. What noble in the capital would be willing to suffer such hardship? A single mistake could cost them their lives. This meant that the temporary control of the neighboring lord would be extended indefinitely, and the frontier territory, which Harvey had cultivated for nearly 3 years in the northern wastes, would effectively become the property of the Figen family. In reality, Earl Figen had no interest in the barren lands north of the Godspeed Mountains. He simply believed from the beginning that a mage lord who had suddenly prospered in the northern wastes in just 2 or 3 years, building a vast frontier territory, must have discovered a treasure within that desolate territory that could bring him immense wealth, either a large gold mine or, perhaps even more valuable, a deposit of magic stone. Otherwise, there was no way to explain how this low-level necromancer, born from a humble background, had amassed such wealth, continuously delivering large quantities of food and supplies to his wasteland domain through the Dragonstone Merchant Guild, the largest in the southern continent, for years. No matter how mysterious and powerful the spellcaster's power was, it was unheard of for anyone to possess the miraculous ability to turn stone into gold. At this time, the clerk pushed the door open and bowed to Earl Figen, saying, Your Excellency, Baron Ross, the representative of the vassal nobles, requests an audience. After obtaining permission for the audience, Baron Ross, a short and fat man with a ferocious face, walked heavily into the Earl's study with a fawning smile. Your Excellency, the vassal nobles are now anxiously waiting. I wonder when you plan to send troops to Jackdaw Town to seek justice for us from that evil wizard lord? He took out a handkerchief and wiped his greasy forehead, and said angrily, that wizard lord detained us in Jackdaw Town some time ago and restricted our personal freedom. After we left, he even occupied our property in the town. Damn it. My Maple End for holiday villa was demolished by those untouchables and burned as firewood. Baron Ross pulled a sheaf of papers from his pocket and, with a smile, handed them to Earl Fagin. Your Excellency, here are the figures we've calculated for the damage to homes and property, totaling over 6,800 gold pounds. 6,800 gold pounds? The encroachment and demolition of a noble's holiday home in a tiny Jackdaw town could have caused such a massive loss of property? Are your houses made of pure gold? Perhaps these people shamelessly added an extra zero to the bill when they settled it? Earl Fagin glanced at Baron Ross, not even considering picking up the account. My army has been assembled, and reinforcements from the capital will arrive at Grizzly Castle soon. But what about you? Do you think I can redeem your losses and seek justice for you simply by talking? Earl Fagin raised his hand and rapped on the desk, a disapproving thud. The call-up order was sent to each of your fiefdoms 3 days ago. How many knights and militiamen do you plan to send to accompany me? Baron Ross's heart skipped a beat, knowing that the Earl would certainly not suffer any loss in vain and let these vassal nobles gain any advantage. His face flushed and he quickly said, Your Excellency, we will certainly respond to your call-up order. Not only myself, but the other nobles have already gathered troops in their respective fiefdoms and are ready to march on Jackdaw Town with your army at any time. After saying this, he added cautiously, but I heard that the wizard lord has many retinues of warriors and is also a powerful spellcaster. Your nephew, Baron Stevie, seems to be. Before he finished speaking, Earl Fagin shouted angrily, Baron Stewie died in a shameless sneak attack, and he was besieged without any preparation. His Majesty the Grand Duke's decree is very clear. He must pay with his life for attacking a noble without any reason. When I tie him to the stake, I will naturally be able to wash away the humiliation of Stewie's defeat and death. After scolding the trembling Baron Ross away, Earl Fagin stood up and paced irritably in the study. Angel, the advisor who stood by his side from beginning to end without saying a word, spoke at the right moment to comfort him. Don't worry, sir. The royal capital has sent a full 100 church judges to support us this time, including several high-level judges and combat priests. Even if that Mage Lord is secretly reinforced by the Federation, we will never fall into disadvantage. The gray-haired old man Angel was originally a spellcaster, but because he was born into an ancient aristocratic family with a long history of Danius and St. Valen, and had both the identities of a spellcaster and a noble, he was naturally excluded from the target of this purge of the Federation's forces. In addition, his family has always been inclined towards secular royal power and church forces, and is a stranger to the spellcaster faction of the Federation. Earl Fagin nodded in agreement, making a rough mental calculation. His 200 elite knights, along with their accompanying retinues and horses, plus the 500 improvised militiamen, all equipped with simple weapons, would make up a force of approximately 1,000 men, the primary force of this expedition. The church reinforcements sent from the capital would naturally proactively deal with the Mage Lord and the Union spellcasters who might be lurking in the shadows to reinforce him, so he didn't need to worry too much about that. As for the vassal nobles, who were obsessed with money and only focused on the slightest gains, aside from the few family knights trained within their respective fiefdoms, the rest of the motley crew would likely serve only to bolster their ranks and raise their flags. According to the nobles who had returned from Jackdaw Town, the troops they had sent to temporarily take over the town numbered no more than 500, and among them were no regular knights in armor. All the soldiers wore thin cotton clothing, barely even a single set of leather armor. Humph. So what if they were spellcasters? In front of the powerful coalition formed by him and the church, they were just as weak and pathetic as a bug crushed by a chariot. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 284. They were the first to take action. Since the arrival of winter, The northern wastes have been blanketed with heavy snowfall for several days. The sun often breaks out after a period of scorching heat, but it's not at all warm. However, the air feels fresher than usual, brightening Harvey's mood as he works each day. Opening the castle windows, he can smell the delicate fragrance of winter frost flowers wafting from the gardens. These are the winter frost flowers that Ignar had specially transplanted to the Lord's castle. In the depths of winter in the frozen north, they are in full bloom. Harvey has been paying close attention to the situation at the River Valley outpost lately. There have been sporadic signs of fell orc activity in that valley, at the northernmost tip of the territory. Reconnaissance reports from the outpost suggest that only small tribes have arrived so far, and they are not a cause for concern. The Valley outpost sent out several reconnaissance teams weekly, repeatedly interweaving across the valley for reconnaissance. They wiped out several small tribes that had clearly recently arrived and settled there, finding that these tribes numbered fewer than 100 men and were clearly not the main force heading south for the raids. Tell the officers of the outpost not to underestimate the enemy and advance too far into the icy plains. Our primary objective is to prepare for a defensive counterattack while we wait for the enemy to tire. We must also ensure the reception and rescue of refugees fleeing from the north. Absorbing the population is paramount, not just focusing on the heads of those evil orcs and their military exploits, Harvey repeatedly reminded Pierce, rapping on the table, to resist the urge to personally lead his troops to the Valley outpost. He must not forget that the human nobles to the south were eyeing the territory with eager eyes and could attack at any moment. Compared to Pierce, Asdallan was noticeably calmer and more measured. He spoke with a hint of worry. If Earl Fagin and the evil orcs attack us simultaneously, fighting on two fronts, won't we be put at a disadvantage? Harvey chuckled and said, "Are you worried about the army's combat effectiveness?" The chief advisor shook his head and explained, "Our combat effectiveness is unquestionable. I'm worried about the army's morale. They've never faced an attack from both sides, and they may be under tremendous psychological pressure going into battle." Pierce puffed out his chest and responded, "Your Excellency, there's absolutely no need to worry about that. I can guarantee that the army's morale will not be affected by the intensity of the war. I can even say that since we haven't been fighting for the past 6 months, almost everyone in the defense force and the Northern Army, officers and soldiers alike, is constantly eager and anticipating new combat missions and target enemies." Harvey interrupted Pierce's unfinished words and added with a chuckle, "It's a soldier's nature to be belligerent, especially since war and adversaries can bring them numerous rewards for military exploits and honors. That's why I insist on cultivating such a large, completely unproductive professional army, when the desire for achievement is directly tied to the promise of real wealth. These professional soldiers, armed with overwhelmingly powerful weapons, are far more formidable than the ordinary peasant soldiers forcibly recruited by the nobles. They are even more hungry than the giant bears and gray wolves that have dormant in the wilderness for an entire winter, a thirst for battle and victory." For the past 2 weeks, the newly formed artillery battalion has officially begun joint training with the Northern Army and the Defense Corps, whether operating fixed lines of defense on the territory's walls to meet the enemy, or cooperating with the Northern Army in field pursuits and ambushes. The primary target of their current external campaign was the coalition of southern nobles led by Earl Fagin of Grizzly Castle. Harvey anticipated that within 2 weeks, Earl Fagin would inevitably attract reinforcements from the church and the capital of Golden City. At that point, he would be unable to hold back and immediately launch an attack on Jackdaw Town. The defenses he had established in Jackdaw Town would allow him to take advantage of the situation and quickly defeat them with long-range artillery fire and a well-trained army of magical and thermal weapons. During this time, the 2 forum spellcasters stationed in Jackdaw Town would monitor the situation from Grizzly Castle. Simply by using flight magic to stay high in the sky, they would have a near-perfect view of the enemy's movements. After all, a large-scale march from Grizzly Castle to Jackdaw Town would take at least 2 days. Even if they abandoned the baggage train and ordinary militia and sent only elite knights and the church's inquisitors for a rapid assault, it would take at least half a day. Therefore, the enemy would undoubtedly camp and rest in the wilderness, providing Harvey with a perfect target for their artillery fire. The ground forces could exploit the nighttime bombardment to encircle the enemy and, after the bombardment subsided, launch a volley charge, annihilating them directly within their field camp. The only remaining issues were the accuracy of the magic-powered artillery in actual combat and the availability of ammunition. The repeated live-fire drills and inter-service joint exercises had consumed most of the magic-powered artillery shells rushed out of the military factories and alchemy laboratories. If Harvey couldn't quickly produce enough ammunition to allow 20 magic-powered cannons to simultaneously fire and unleash unbridled fire on the enemy positions, his engagement plan would become a mere theoretical exercise. Notify Reiner and Chris immediately to suspend all other non-essential production and fully operationalize the ammunition production lines. Even if it means working 3 shifts, we must ensure the logistical supply of ammunition. I want to see the military factories ablaze with lights at night. After the 3 of them discussed the upcoming battle in the study, Pierce hurriedly excused himself and returned to the barracks. As Dallin then began to discuss post-war development plans and target selection with Harvey. My lord, after defeating Count Feigen's coalition of nobles, what is our next move? Jackdaw Town is now effectively under our control. Should we maintain a permanent garrison there and bring the townspeople under our jurisdiction? Harvey had actually been considering this question for a long time. Jackdaw Town might appear to be separated from the frontier territory by only a mountain, but the distance was actually quite long. Even with the swiftly traversable magic vehicles and warbeasts, it would still take the better part of a day to reach it. And that was just the one-way journey. While this small border town served as a major transit point for Harvey's import and export trade with the Southern Territory Chamber of Commerce, and served as a fortress for him to monitor the movements of the surrounding Southern Territory nobles and the church, outright occupation and incorporation was not a good option. Jackdaw Town offered no valuable products that Harvey was interested in, and its permanent population was pitifully small, mostly consisting of free farmers and hunters with small, marginal plots of land. This held little appeal for Harvey. The best approach was to leave it alone, preventing the southern nobles from interfering and preventing excessive manpower and resources from disrupting the town's current structure. Of course, if the townspeople voluntarily relocated and joined the domain, Harvey would welcome them. What he lacked most right now were labor and money. While chatting with Azdarin, the magic computer in the study suddenly began beeping, and Azdarin immediately stepped forward to investigate. What happened? Is this a message from the forum? Harvey asked leisurely, taking a sip of his hot tea. The chief advisor turned and announced solemnly, Your Excellency, Grand Duke St. Valen, in conjunction with the Church of Radiance, has officially declared war on the Spellcaster Union. Chapter 285 Silent Thunder. The allied nobles of Count Feigen, Lord of Grizzly Castle, marched in a mighty procession towards Jackdaw Town. At the forefront of the coalition were Count Feigen's family knights and a contingent of judges dispatched by the church from Golden City. The knights' armor, weapons, and steeds clearly revealed the disparity in strength between the lords they served. Undoubtedly, the most uniform and imposing of the troops were Count Feigen's family knights. These knights rode long maned war horses, a specialty of Golden City, the capital of St. Valen. These horses were stable, towering, and possessed explosive power in a sprint, a classic warhorse breed that accentuated the knight's impressive presence. The shiny new armor was paired with an exquisitely embroidered family crest on the cape behind. A massive, ferocious grizzly bear, roaring in anger, was embossed on the thick breastplate. A dark red gold silk sash cinched his waist, signifying the knight's ancestry and professional training. Earl Feigen commanded 200 of these elite knights. This was a family with a fiefdom, a force cultivated and trained over generations. They were unlike the knights bred by the vassals of lesser nobles. Every winter, they would patrol the borderlands of Earl Feigen's fiefdom, clearing out the occasional orcs who crossed the Divine Spine Mountains and entered the southern border to maraud, ensuring the safety of the lord's fiefdom and property. Count Grizzly Castle had dispatched them all on this expedition, counting on this elite force from the St. Valen border to sweep away all enemies standing in his way with unrivaled force, safeguarding his authority as lord and his family's interests in this region. The church's inquisitors, clad in heavy silver armor and also silently marching on war horses, were also not to be underestimated. Count Feigen had no idea how many extraordinary warriors with bloodline innate abilities were hidden within this 100-man inquisitor contingent, but the tall, taciturn Knight Inquisitor, with an unusually gloomy expression, who led the charge, was undoubtedly a formidable and battle-hardened high-ranking warrior. Behind the knights marched a phalanx of roughly 1,000 militiamen and mercenaries. Their equipment was noticeably inferior to that of the elite knights in front. Only a few wore old, patchwork chainmail and mail, while the rest wore the cheapest leather armor, often missing parts. Their weapons were incredibly varied, including machetes, spears, flails, and even some carrying rusted iron swords. At the end of the long march were the tenant farmers and freeholders, forcibly conscripted by various noble lords. They carried their own rations and pulled donkey carts carrying food and war supplies. They trudged along the snow-covered dirt roads, their pace slowing dramatically. The lesser nobles were forced to dispatch their knights to steer them back and forth, urging them on with shouts and whips. "Your Excellency, the army will arrive at Jackdaw Town soon." Derek, a priest of the church on horseback, pulled the reins to slow down the horse, and slowly approached Earl Figan, who was walking in the front of the team. "Should we go into the town to rest for the night, and then cross Jackdaw Ridge the next morning, or should we march directly over the mountain at night to catch the enemy off guard?" Earl Figan, who was a strong man with black curly hair, chuckled. "Marching in the mountains and forests at night is not good for us, and it will easily make the knights and soldiers exhausted. There is no need to rush. Let's spend the night in Jackdaw Town tonight. I don't want to sleep in a tent in the snow and ice, and wake up in the morning with the gaps in my armor frozen by frost." What he didn't say explicitly was that the part of this war that the recruited mercenaries were most looking forward to was probably the small looting every time the army passed through a town. After all, they did not have generous military pay like the nobles' domestic knights. While Jackdaw Town was still nominally Earl Figan's fiefdom, it didn't generate any significant tax revenue. Furthermore, according to the minor nobles who had fled, the townspeople had been flirting with a mage lord across the mountain, clearly disregarding their true fiefdom lord. A little hardship was only natural. "You say the mage lord commands fewer than 1,000 retainers and private soldiers. Is that information absolutely true?" the High Inquisitor, who had been silent until then, suddenly asked. "Then how did he manage to survive several winters safely in the northern wastes with such a small force? Haven't the fell orcs been raiding southward in recent years?" Earl Figan coughed awkwardly twice and chuckled. "You've come all the way from Golden Glory City and aren't familiar with the local situation. But I know the fell orcs inside and out. The mountains along Jackdaw Ridge, stretching for hundreds of miles, provide countless valleys and calls that allow them to disperse southward. With any luck, their frontier territories won't encounter a large fell orc army." The church priest nodded in agreement. Indeed, ever since the demons' offensive against the Evil Moon Mountain slowed, they seem to have diverted a large number of their forces to raid the evil orcs' tribal court deep in the icy plains. As a result, they've diverted much of their main forces to deal with their old neighbors in the wasteland. Those who have wandered into the vicinity of Jackdaw Ridge are likely just a mob of small tribes. Upon hearing this, Earl Figan smiled with confidence and, with a hint of flattery, warned, "But we can't completely let our guard down. Although His Majesty the Grand Duke and the Church have wiped out most of the Federation's influence in the country, there are undoubtedly still many who have slipped through the net within Master Harvey's territory, secretly assisting him. To deal with these evil magicians with their treacherous methods, we naturally need you to step up." The High Judge, who looked cold and arrogant, snorted lightly upon hearing this. Just as he was about to speak, the scout knight sent by the Earl in front suddenly rushed back and rushed to Earl Figan to report, "Your Excellency, we have discovered that the private soldiers of the Mage Lord have gathered outside Jackdaw Town and have built a number of temporary defensive fortifications. The number of soldiers is estimated to be around 500. Oh? They didn't hide in the pioneering territory in the northern wilderness waiting for us to come, but chose to take the initiative to attack." Earl Figan raised his eyebrows and smiled contemptuously. "That's good, at least it saves us a lot of trouble in crossing mountains and rivers. I hope that Mage Harvey himself is waiting for us in Jackdaw Town now, so that I don't have to go to the wilderness to search for him after defeating his vassal. Notify all knights to assemble in formation, slow down their horses, and wait for the order to charge at any time." The High Inquisitor said calmly, "We will hide within the Knights' Charge, keeping a constant watch for any possible Union spellcasters. The battle priests will also provide support from the rear, preventing them from sending spellcasters to disrupt our infantry and baggage trains." With that, the two of them led a group of knight officers up a high slope overlooking Jackdaw Town, observing the enemy forces assembled outside the town. Earl Figan immediately noticed the strange composition of the enemy troops. Not a single one of them wore armor. Instead, they all wore the same thick, dark cotton coats and caps. Their weapons, however, were fairly comprehensive, slung across their backs, revealing long handles. They were likely spears, apparently designed specifically to counter the knight's charge. But the enemy soldiers were packed tightly together in 3 or 4 rows, devoid of wood and barbed wire or pre-dug trenches. They relied solely on a few earthen walls, less than a meter high, made of sacks filled with earth. Could they possibly withstand the charge of their heavily armored knights? Such a flimsy defense wouldn't require any effort on the part of the knights. A single concentrated charge would pierce it. This spellcaster, truly inexperienced in leading troops, possessed a complete lack of common sense. They dared to cross the mountains and present themselves to him, treating war like a joke. According to the rules of engagement between nobles, Earl Figan, as the initiator of the war, should have dispatched a servant bearing a banner to the enemy camp, requesting an audience with the noble lord, formally declaring war on his behalf, and presenting a document of surrender. It was merely a formality, adhering to aristocratic etiquette. Fortunately, the enemy wasn't truly aristocratic, saving Earl Figan the trouble of superficial preparation. The knights of the noble coalition were not assembling quickly. Lesser nobles from the rear continued to ride up to the ranks, slowly joining the charge. Earl Figan frowned, about to call in his vassal nobles to reprimand them, when he suddenly heard a faint humming sound from the distant enemy positions. He quickly turned his horse and peered forward, spotting dozens of blazing white flashes behind the enemy's weak defenses. Before he could react, a series of agonizing cries of disarray echoed in his ears. The church priest at his side immediately shouted a warning, "Be careful. The enemy army is full of spellcasters. They're using long-range cluster spellcasting. Disperse and take cover." Knights, the Knights of the Judgment, imbued with the power of their bloodlines, reacted swiftly, tugging at their horses' reins and dislodging into the forested hills on either side of the road, stealthily slithering towards the enemy positions. Were they a multitude of spellcasters unleashing magical attacks upon their knight phalanx? Could it be that the enemy had secretly hidden an elite Confederation mage regiment within their own wasteland territory? Earl Figan's mind was buzzing. So many spellcasters? How is this possible? Chapter 286, Battle of Jackdaw Town. The noble coalition from Grizzly Castle was still more than a dozen miles from Jackdaw Town when Pierce, in charge of the battle command, received a warning from two high-level spellcasters. Standing on a high slope outside the town, observing through the officer's monocular, the hybrid's gift of exceptional long-range vision allowed him to clearly see the enemy on the main road, approximately 300 fully armed regular knights and a seemingly motley group of militia and mercenaries. He estimated their number to be no more than 1,000. Pierce lowered his binoculars, his lips curling slightly in a subtle sneer. Turning to Vaughn, the commander of the Northern Army Battalion, who had already begun to fret, he ordered, "Pass the word down. Put the soldiers into combat mode and be ready to engage the enemy at any moment. Commander, the Special Operations Team has signaled they are in position. We await your order for the flanking assault." Pierce waved his hand and said gravely, "Tell them to take it easy. Follow the agreed battle plan. Once the bombardment begins, wait for my orders." Lord Harvey had originally planned that the noble coalition troops departing from Grizzly Castle would camp for the night and rest, entering the open battlefield as outlined in the predefined first battle plan. However, Earl Figan, impulsive, preferred a night march to reach Jackdaw Town before nightfall, seemingly determined to avoid further delay. This forced Pierce to resort to a second plan, a frontal blockade of the enemy from the pre-established secondary defense line outside the town. But that wasn't a big deal. He definitely preferred a piece of fat meat they had to proactively grab, rather than having it suddenly and unintentionally delivered to them. This was the first time Lynx had seen human knights from the southern border. Honestly, compared to the howling demonic orc knights charging across the wasteland atop camels and bristly boars, these beings, clad in gleaming armor and mounted on majestic steeds, were much more appealing. The battalion commander remarked that each of these southern knights held a similar rank to an officer in the territorial army, with numerous retinues and vassals accompanying them in battle and charging. This was somewhat surprising to Lynx and his men. With a force of less than 2,000 men, there were 300 or 400 knight officers. The average number of soldiers each commanded was far too small, completely undermining their commanding abilities. It seems these knight officers aren't worth much in the way of military achievements, certainly not as much as killing a golden-crowned demonic orc leader, Lynx commented with a shrug. Despite a faint feeling of disdain, as the hundreds of elite knights slowly formed into neat formation, Xiang Mao felt a slight sweat on his back. It was like the first time he'd been sent to the valley outpost and faced those hideous-looking demonic orcs, only this time they were facing his own people from the southern border. It was the first time he had turned his weapon against his own kind, and the thought of how these living people would be shattered into pieces by the terrifyingly powerful magical shells after the bombardment, just like the targets they trained on during live fire training, made Shan Meo feel a bit uneasy. The other artillery group closest to the mountain cat was led by a fellow desert refugee with a rather amusing name of Madao. While the commander was observing the enemy not far away, he quietly approached the pale-faced mountain cat, pointed at the enemy knights gathering in the distance, spat on the ground, and said viciously, "Don't have the slightest mercy on these guys. You know, my family and I fled all the way from the desert to the southern border to escape the slaughter of the evil orcs. We didn't steal or rob just to stay alive." Humph, and what happened in the end? These damn nobles blocked us at the border. My poor brother had his heel chopped off by a knight on a huge horse, just for the fun of watching him limp away. And my mother was trampled to death by their horses as they chased us. Xiang Meo looked at the twisted scar that ran the length of Madao's face, realizing it was the result of a longsword or other sharp blade. A surge of rage surged within him, a burning sensation rising from his chest and abdomen to his throat. The Lord had made it clear in his pre-battle speech before the army departed, "These shameless and greedy southern nobles seek to seize and plunder the paradise and home we've painstakingly built in the wasteland. If we can't defeat them in Jackdaw Town, these nobles and knights, who treat them like no one, will plunder without restraint, then cross the towering Jackdaw Ridge Mountains and march directly into the frontier territories, seizing all the peaceful and free people as slaves." Shan Meo couldn't help but think of his soon-to-be-wed sister, of his superior who had always respected him, smiling as he signed the mortgage agreement, of the sweet, refreshing lager at the officers' club, and of the bustling bustle of the convenience market every evening. "No. I will never allow it. We will never allow these despicable nobles to lay hands on our homes. We must fight for our lord, our home, and ourselves and our families." Suddenly, a bird's whistle echoed through the sky. Lynx instinctively looked up and saw a figure in ornate robes floating out of thin air to his left. It was the spellcaster, serving the Lord, directing the artillery battalion's guns. The sound of his bird's whistle signaled the enemy had entered the 1,000-meter range. The 6 artillery crews behind the infantry positions immediately sprang into action, skillfully and swiftly following the routines they had practiced countless times during joint drills. They aimed their guns, cleaned the barrels, loaded the shells, released the safety catches, confirmed their targets with the firing scales, and prepared to fire. Loaded, aim, safety on, fire, the artillery crews, already in perfect harmony, whispered commands. In less than 5 seconds, Bobcat quickly cranked a muzzle lever and put the distant enemy into the designated hole on the shooting scale. He licked his dry lips and began to count down silently in his mind, waiting for the commander to issue the final order to fire. A short whistle means the target has entered the artillery range, a long whistle means the artillery crew needs to enter the firing position. 3 short whistles and 1 long whistle means the entire artillery crew needs to fire a salvo. Just as he thought of this, the long-awaited attack order from above his head came. He took a deep breath and pulled the cannon's firing lever without hesitation. Fire. Chapter 287, A Crushing Defeat. Count Figen could not fathom how the enemy could unleash such terrifying spells of devastating power into his own ranks from a distance of nearly 1,000 meters. He had witnessed countless instances of spellcasters unleashing magic, from the moment a blazing fireball the size of a head to the moment a blade of icy ice pierced its target. From the moment the spellcaster chanted this spell until it flew and struck the target, the maximum range was no more than 200 or 300 meters. A phalanx charge, on the other hand, was limited by the terrain and the horse's stamina. It wasn't always possible to charge at full speed from the outset. Experienced commanders would typically initiate a trot from a distance of 1,000 meters, gradually accelerating as they approached the enemy line of about 500 meters, ultimately advancing to a high-speed charge of 100 meters. Therefore, Count Figen reasoned that assembling his phalanx from 1,000 meters should be a perfectly safe distance. Neither spellcasters hiding among the enemy soldiers nor ordinary bows and crossbows would threaten his knights, and they would have ample time and range to launch a cavalry charge. Who could have imagined that this incredibly inefficient knight formation would make them sitting ducks for the artillery? 6 magic-powered cannons hummed with the thud of fire almost simultaneously. A stream of searing air, carrying the magic energy shells, shot out from their muzzles at high speeds, reaching speeds imperceptible to the naked eye the moment they left the barrels. In the blink of an eye, they exploded directly into the enemy knight formation 1,000 meters away. The canisters, filled with liquid magic energy, erupted with violent energy beams from their cans almost as soon as they landed, emitting a series of piercing whistles. The heavily armored knights of Earl Fagin's family, standing closest to the impact point, barely had time to react before they were ripped apart, their armor and flesh pierced through. The horses beneath them were disemboweled, their hot entrails spilling onto the ground. The falling of men and horses, along with the scattering of debris and dirt, startled the horses outside the blast radius. Many knights, completely unaware of the situation, were thrown from their mounts. More men shouted and tugged at the reins, desperately trying to calm the agitated horses. Since it was the first volley, a full half of the 6 magical shells missed their target, landing in the dense forest on either side of the enemy's target formation. Commander Pierce, furious, turned and glared coldly at the artillery battalion. Lynx felt a chill run down his spine and quickly completed the reloading and aiming procedures. The second round of bombardment began. Even flesh, encased within solid steel armor, was exposed to the relentless bombardment of magical energy shells, revealing its fragility and vulnerability. Anyone within 10 meters of the impact point and blast radius was virtually certain to suffer a horrific fate. Limbs, shattered by the penetrating energy beams, scattered haphazardly across the ground, while a cloud of bloody mist suddenly erupted. All that could be heard was the faint hissing sound of jets of air, as if an invisible ghost were darting freely through the ranks, madly preying on everyone. Another terrifying round of magical attacks descended upon them. In his panic, Earl Fagin finally connected the white flashes of light emanating from the distant enemy camp and the sudden hissing sounds within his own ranks to the inexplicable ranged attack. That wasn't a massive, long-range, swarming spell unleashed by a multitude of spellcasters. It was some incredible magical weapon. The range far exceeded that of magic and bows, almost comparable to the massive trebuchets seen only in siege warfare. Furthermore, there seemed to be a period of pause between attacks, preventing incessant and indiscriminate firing. Thinking of this, the Duke immediately ordered his knights to sound the attack horn. He couldn't wait for his troops to assemble into neat formation before charging. He had to close the distance with the enemy as quickly as possible, rendering the magical trebuchets ineffective at long range. As for how to deal with them later, it would be up to the Inquisition knights and church priests who, upon being attacked, had infiltrated the mountains and forests on both sides and attacked the enemy. They were confident that they would hunt down the despicable spellcasters who were wielding magical weapons from afar and bring them down mercilessly. But Earl Fagin had overestimated the discipline of his own knights. When the attack horn sounded, aside from his own family knights who obeyed, the remaining knights under the various vassal nobles remained in disarray and disobeyed orders. Some, despite the horn's call, could not spur their horses forward, instead tugging at the reins and struggling with their restless mounts. Others, unable to locate the noble lords they were loyal to, drove their horses in circles in confusion. A small number, witnessing the horrific scene of the inexplicable attack within their ranks, actually turned their horses and retreated. Combined with the mercenaries in the rear, who hadn't yet grasped the situation, rushing forward at the horn's call, the scene became a scene of utter chaos. Standing on tiptoe, Lynx saw the enemy slowly advancing towards him in the distance. He immediately followed his commander's instructions, reloading his cannon, adjusting his firing angle, and then adjusting the height of his cannon's mount, lowering the muzzle. Another brief bird's whistle echoed through the sky. Through the holes in the shooting sight, the metallic sheen of the knight's armor could clearly be seen, reflecting the setting sun. The third round of artillery fire began. After the low humming sound ended, the artillery crew didn't bother to check the results, but simply began to repeat the firing process again. They didn't need to worry about their accuracy. Countless experience gained from live fire training taught them that at a range of around 500 meters, the magic-powered cannon's flat fire accuracy was almost 95%, with no chance of misses. The 4 artillerymen in the 6-man crew, responsible for auxiliary observation and security, immediately removed their magic guns from their backs, removed the metal shields from the gun carriage, and dug themselves into the ground. They crouched down behind the shields, pointed their guns at the enemy nearby, and provided cover for their 2 comrades manning the guns. This was merely a routine exercise, and in reality, they were rarely put to use. Forward of the artillery battalion's position lay over 500 battle-hardened Northern Army soldiers, eagerly awaiting action. The command to fire volleys was almost immediately given to the soldiers crouching in the trenches. The magical muskets unleashed beams of white light that rained down upon the enemy. The knights, already accelerating, reached a distance of 300 meters when they were instantly engulfed in a torrential downpour of magic. Horses and men burst into blood, falling in neat rows like wheat. The knights in the rear, who had managed to escape the barrage of magic, had no time to slow down, and could only grit their teeth and continue their charge. Finally closing in on the enemy, each with a single thought in mind: if they could breach this flimsy line of sandbag defense, the unarmored civilian soldiers hiding behind it, along with their sinister magical weapons, would be rendered useless. With their warhorses charging at top speed, the 300-meter mark seemed to vanish in a flash. The knights, already familiar with the enemy's attack patterns, cleverly crouched low, desperately stabbing their horses' bellies with their heel spurs, increasing their speed to maximum. Yet, this short distance, which could be covered in just 10 breaths, somehow became an unfathomable barrier. The nearly uninterrupted barrage of magic lances completely crushed the fighting spirit of these elite knights. In the final 100 meters, the magic lance's penetrating power reached its maximum potential, each energy beam capable of simultaneously piercing 2 or 3 charging enemies stacked one behind the other. The knight officer at the forefront was practically blasted to pieces, his horse and body ripped apart. Without a sound, he and his horse fell heavily to the ground. The charging knights inevitably collapsed. Fear of death, coupled with the intimidating power of their evil magical weapons, drove them to abandon their allegiance to their lords, turning their horses' reins and scattering, attempting to escape this realm that seemed like the arrival of death. The wave of defeat completely swept through the noble coalition that Count Feigen had painstakingly assembled. The mercenaries, who had originally come to plunder the battlefield, were even more vulnerable. Seeing the knights in front of them collapse instantly, they immediately threw away their armor and weapons like birds and beasts, and scattered into the forests on both sides with cries. The situation quickly became completely uncontrollable. The crowds rushed forward and backward, and those who were crushed to the ground would be immediately trampled to death by the horses. But no one had time to care for others. Fleeing to the rear or the slopes on the sides was a good option, and they only wished they had 2 more legs to run faster. But soon they fell into despair again, because from the forests on both sides, a large number of neatly arranged enemy troops suddenly appeared. They seemed to appear out of thin air in their escape route. Wearing strangely colored clothing that almost blended in with the surrounding environment, they fired mercilessly at the defeated deserters. Every bright white flash of gun muzzle silently harvested a living life. The 2 spellcasters, using flight magic to float above the battlefield, Kim Gavin, the Eye of Illusion, and Melissa Penna, the astrologer, stationed in Jackdaw Town, spotted a squad of Inquisition troops circling the rear of the battlefield and immediately alerted the Northern Army soldiers below. The 2 exchanged a glance, then, with sneers, dived toward the sinister group of church clerics. The Bloodline Warrior Special Operations Team, alerted on the ground, reacted almost instantly, following the high-level spellcasters' charge in the sky and swooping down upon the church's enemies, who, like themselves, possessed extraordinary powers. What followed was a life-or-death battle between these transcendents. Chapter 288 Lightning-Fast Pursuit. Had he not pleaded with the Lord, tugging at his sleeve, Dirt would never have been allowed to enter the battlefield of Jackdaw Town. He couldn't help but feel fortunate that his shameless actions had allowed him to witness a battle scene unlike anything he had ever experienced. The charging formation of hundreds of noble knights, unable to even reach the sandbags piled up along the frontier army's defensive lines, were routed and scattered like headless flies. In the end, these elite knights couldn't even reach their own soldiers' defenses. There was no bloody, brutal hand-to-hand combat, no one-sided slaughter of cavalry versus infantry. All that lay before him was a tangled mess of trampled mud and countless corpses, both human and horse, lying scattered across the ground. Most were mangled and bloodied, sending a chill down the spines of the young spellcaster, who had rarely experienced the brutality of battle. 6 terrifying magic-powered cannons blasted the enemy to pieces at a distance of 700 or 800 meters. Within a 300-meter charge, these noble knights, professionally trained and skilled since childhood, were shattered like thin sheets of paper by the magic spears, offering no resistance at all. Dirt couldn't help but recall the injunctions his instructors had given him back in the academy. Low and mid-level spellcasters without the ability to fly should avoid being caught in the crossfire of mortal knights. If long-range spells failed, a close charge by a mounted knight, and the spellcaster's mana was exhausted, would be a near-certain death. Yet, The commoner soldiers under his lord's command, armed only with their magic spears, easily dispatched these elite knights, dispatching them like mere chickens and dogs. The knights meticulously trained by the secular nobility were nothing more than this. The battle between the bloodline warriors and the church's inquisitors continued in the mountains and forests to the rear. Dirt was no longer worried about the outcome. He knew full well that the extraordinary warriors who usually accompanied the Lord were almost all equipped with the same magical weapons as these soldiers. Furthermore, 2 high-level spellcasters serving the Lord were also participating in the battle, true high-ranking battle mages. The setting sun gradually faded behind the towering Jackdaw Ridge. On the front battlefield, aside from the Northern Army troops tasked with pursuing the deserters, the remaining soldiers were assigned to clean up the battlefield. They seemed accustomed to seeing mangled limbs and corpses, moving fearlessly across the battlefield, chatting and picking up the scattered knight armor and exquisite weapons, even collecting the bodies of the poor creatures. Dirt witnessed a soldier, while stripping the armor off a corpse, realized the knight was still alive. Without hesitation, he stabbed the knight through the neck with a bayonet attached to his magic rifle. Count Figen still hadn't recovered from his shock, unable to comprehend the exact nature of his defeat. The knight's charging phalanx, braving the barrage of magical catapults, had finally closed in on the enemy's weak defenses, only to suddenly collapse en masse. The remaining men fled in panic, as if they had seen the devil and the Grim Reaper. No matter how he shouted and rebuked them, he could not bring back these brave knights who had once sworn their allegiance to him. The mercenaries and militiamen who had been improvised were even more vulnerable, falling into chaos before they could even grasp the situation. The dozen or so personal guards who accompanied the Count, their swords bent, barely managed to shield Count Figen from the chaotic battlefield, preventing him from being caught in the throng and accidentally injured. Amidst the chaos, even the guards bearing the banners lost a banner symbolizing their lordship and family honor. Earl Figen, too lazy to blame his subordinates, could only helplessly retreat with his guards toward the defensive lines of Grizzly Castle. It wasn't until nightfall that Earl Figen's troops found a flat area near a lake to set up camp. Many of the family knights who had been separated in the chaos of the battle followed the hoofprints of the large group and reunited with their lord. The whereabouts of the recruited mercenaries and conscripted laborers were naturally unknown. In their defeat, they had unhesitatingly abandoned the donkey carts carrying supplies and food, forcing the Earl's men to slaughter their horses to feed themselves that night. Baron Ross, a representative of the vassal nobles, had been at the rear of the charging knights from the outset, but luckily escaped with his life. Earl Figen was aware of his cowardice, but he had no desire to hold him accountable. There was only one simple tent left in the camp, so it naturally belonged to the Earl. Inside the tent, the few remaining minor nobles who had fought with the army gathered around Earl Figen, their faces pale and silent as they stared at their lord, all of them looking miserable and terrified. Earl Figen drew his longsword and stuck it into the ground, shouting in a deep voice, who could have known what kind of magic and weapons they used to be able to shoot farther than a bow and crossbow, yet their attack method was completely undetectable, leading to their inexplicable defeat. Baron Ross sat cross-legged on the ground in an awkward position, enduring the damp and cold feeling in his crotch beneath his armor, and replied tremblingly, "Your Excellency, I didn't see it clearly at all. When the knights were gathering, I only heard the priests of the church's Inquisition army shout that it was a spellcaster launching an attack. Then, not far in front of me, a knight was struck by lightning. His body and limbs suddenly tore apart, and even the horse under his crotch turned into a pile of minced meat. It was simply a scene like hell." The leader of the guards muttered softly, "That was the spellcaster. Only those evil wizards could have such terrifying methods. Their strange spells are simply impossible for ordinary people to resist." "Impossible?" Earl Figen frowned. "I've seen them cast spells many times in the past, and they always required long chanting of incantations with time intervals, and it's impossible for them to hurt us from such a long distance. The magic attack can only reach 200 or 300 meters. At this point, Earl Figen suddenly recalled that he was on the battlefield and vaguely saw dozens of balls of bright white light behind the enemy's defense line. He slapped his thigh and stood up with sudden realization. "I remember. Those catapult-like things behind their positions, and the strange long sticks without gun tips held in the hands of those soldiers, that's their secret weapons," Baron Ross said cautiously. "Even if we find out what weapons the other side is using, we have already lost. What should we do next?" The Earl glared at him with a hint of embarrassment, stiffening his neck in a fierce defense. "We haven't completely failed yet. It's just the loss of a battle, And look at how cowardly you are. As long as I return to Grizzly Castle, I can raise another army. This time I won't underestimate the enemy. His Majesty the Grand Duke has joined forces with the Church to formally declare war on the Spellcaster Union. We just need to wait for His Majesty to send more reinforcements skilled in dealing with spellcasters. There will always be a chance to make a comeback. He paced back and forth in the tent, muttering to himself viciously, that guy's wasteland territory relies entirely on the southern border Chamber of Commerce for food and daily necessities. I just need to hold on to Grizzly Castle and send people to cut off all trade routes leading to Jackdaw Town. Without food and supplies, they definitely won't last long. But before the Earl could finish his words, a violent commotion erupted outside the tent. Rushing out with his guards, he found everyone in the camp, their armor discarded, fleeing in panic. A nearby bonfire was doused by a shower of flying dirt. He heard the sharp ripping of knights' armor pierced by magical weapons. Before the Earl could react, his guards grabbed a warhorse and shoved him atop it. Hurry, Earl! They're coming. Fagin slumped over his horse with a panicked expression, glanced around and saw countless bright torches, seemingly lit in the deep woods outside the lakeside camp. Mixed in with the pristine white light of many illuminating magic stones, was how they'd caught up with him so quickly? Chapter 289 Noble Captives. Earl Fagin looked at the pursuers, who had seemingly completed their encirclement of the lakeside camp, and his heart sank. After their defeat on the battlefield outside Jackdaw Town, they had retreated without delay for a full 70 or 80 miles, even galloping at full speed to reach this point. How could these foot soldiers have caught up with him almost instantly, and even completed a silent encirclement under cover of darkness? His Majesty, the Grand Duke in the royal capital of Golden Glory City, had already officially declared war on the Spellcaster Union. This declaration of war would undoubtedly be seen by fellow spellcasters as an irreconcilable enemy. Escape was impossible. Galloping through the mountains and forests at night wouldn't get far. Would he surrender on the spot? Perhaps, given his noble status, he could easily afford to ask his family to pay a generous ransom for his life. While the humiliation he would face would be utterly tolerable compared to his own life. Watching the army steadily approaching from the mountains and forests, and the occasional flashes of white flames in the dense woods beyond, Earl Fagin realized that the enemy was once again using those ultra-long-range magic catapults to reap the lives of the knights and personal guards in his makeshift camp. He opened his mouth in panic, but found that the words of surrender could not come out. The blood-stained personal guards gathered around him to protect him in the center, constantly urging, "Your Excellency, these infantry can't stop us. As long as we form a cavalry formation and break out of the encirclement, they will never be able to catch up on foot. We are only a night's journey from Grizzly Castle. Please lead us in the charge." The Earl pulled the reins and paced in place. After a moment's hesitation, he suddenly saw that the enemy soldiers had stopped advancing in unison and raised their iron clubs without spearheads. A series of intense sizzling sounds echoed, and the guards who stood before him exploded in giant sprays of blood, falling from their horses with screams. The captain of the guards, who had served him since childhood, suffered even more misery. Hit directly in the face by the strange weapon, his skull exploded like a fragile egg, spraying blood and brain matter all over the Earl's head and face. Count Fagin, horrified, quickly drew the longsword symbolizing his rank and raised it high, shouting his identity to the group of soldiers. "Hold the attack! Hold the attack! I am the Lord of Grizzly Castle, the hereditary Earl Fay." He had barely uttered a word when he felt a sudden jolt in his chest and abdomen, like a hammer blow through his armor. Then, a warm current flowed from his upper body to his waist. A sharp numbness and exhaustion spread throughout his body and limbs. He collapsed backward, falling heavily from his horse. The leading half-orc officer, Deaf, stepped forward and looked at the noble knights lying on the ground. He scratched his head and muttered in confusion, "What was that old man talking about just now? Hey, his long sword looks pretty good." The Northern Army, which was responsible for the mission of going out to fight, would conduct several long-distance forced marches in the wasteland almost every month. Night marches were an essential training item. Compared to the rugged and dense mountains of the wasteland, the road from Jackdaw Town to Grizzly Fort was as smooth as walking on flat ground. The leading pursuit troops rode on lightning-fast magic carts in groups of 2, and the following soldiers rode in war beast vehicles in an orderly manner. Only the artillery battalion was a little slower, requiring 2 alchemical camel beasts to pull the artillery carts in the back to support the formation. Most of the bloodline warriors had participated in the earlier battle with the church's inquisition outside the town. With the powerful assistance of 2 high-level spellcasters, they utilized the perfect combination of their magic spears and their own bloodline talents to encircle and annihilate the enemy with minimal casualties. They also captured 2 individuals who appeared to be high-ranking priests. A team was immediately dispatched to escort them back to the territory to be interrogated and dealt with by the Lord. The mercenaries and civilians who fled across the mountains were not bothered to deal with. They would capture as many as they could, as the head of the frontier territory's minds were eagerly awaiting these free laborers. According to the Lord and Commander Pierce's orders, the pursuit troops were primarily targeting the nobles and knights, who rode majestic horses and shimmering armor. It was said that capturing any of them would yield a generous ransom, and the proceeds would directly contribute to the Northern Army's military expenditures for this operation. Of course, the Lord also added that any enemy who dared to raise their weapons and resist should be killed on the spot, regardless of their status, just like the group Duff had just encountered. Clear the battlefield. Those who have surrendered and those lying helpless on the ground, drag them into the carts and take them away. Check them carefully. Anyone still breathing can be exchanged for money. Don't forget to give them a few sips of first aid potion to keep them alive, Duff shouted with a grin, rubbing his hands together and personally taking to the battlefield, picking through the pile of dead enemy bodies before him, looking for something that looked decent to take home. Soldiers were required to turn in all the spoils they collected during combat, but officers were allowed to select a single piece of trophy, simply by exchanging their battle merit for it. Next month would be his good brother Vaughn's birthday, and this would be his first time celebrating it. Dave had already decided on a gift for him. A trophy representing his bravery and military exploits would be the perfect choice. He ripped a blood-stained belt, its buckle still gleaming with gold, from the waist of the sturdy old man who had just flaunted his sword at him. He rubbed it against his uniform with satisfaction and tucked it into his combat pouch. A team leader came over and reminded, "Boss, before we set out, Commander Pierce reminded us to try our best to find and capture Earl Fagin, the primary target of this battle, alive. But we searched the entire camp and couldn't find him. We don't even know what the Earl looks like. Could he have escaped?" Dave frowned and shook his head. "It doesn't matter if he escaped. Wayne has already got ahead of us with a special operations team of bloodline warriors. They are guarding the only way for them to return to Grizzly Castle. Not a single fly can fly back to their nest." He happily picked up the sharp sword and smiled at his subordinates. "This sword is amazing. I will present it to the Lord myself. It will be perfect to hang in his study. He will definitely like it." A day and a night later, in addition to a group of embarrassed prisoners, the first group of returning soldiers arrived at the frontier territory together with Duff, the captain of the 1st Battalion of the Northern Army, who was escorted by Vaughn himself and had a bruised face. "My lord, that fool didn't even recognize Earl Fagin and shot him dead." Vaughn's face sank, blaming himself for not giving repeated instructions and mandatory orders before setting out, causing his lord to lose a large sum of ransom proceeds. "Dead," Harvey paused, coming to his senses. It was as if he had watched at least tens of thousands of pounds of wealth fly away from him on wings. His face twitched with pain. Never mind, let him be dead. The soldiers fought hard, and on the battlefield, guns are blind. It's understandable that he didn't survive. As for not recognizing Earl Fagin, Harvey smiled bitterly and covered his face. In fact, he didn't even know Earl Fagin himself, had no idea what he looked like, let alone his wasteland soldiers, who even the southern nobles had never seen. Duff won't be punished by military law this time. Use his combat merits to offset the punishment. It doesn't have to be too harsh, but it won't happen again. He paused and added quickly, keeping the remaining noble captives safe, and after counting their family identities, send out the ransom letters as soon as possible to avoid any more trouble. As Dallin came forward with a stack of documents and reported in a businesslike tone, "Sir, the statistics have been compiled. The ransom these nobles need to pay is a total of 38,000 gold pounds. This is calculated according to the redemption practice of the warring nobles in the southern border countries. Would you like to see the specific list?" Harvey shook his head. "No need. The ransom will be increased by 30%. Nobles who can't afford the money can use food and the population of their fiefdoms to offset their debts. If you don't accept, just recover and send them to the mines to do hard labor." Chapter 290 Bombarding Grizzly Fort. Atop Grizzly Castle's towering eastern ramparts, a fully armored knight commander raised a monocular, peering endlessly toward Jackdaw Town. The Earl's magical advisor, Angel, hurried up the battlements, approached the Knight Commander, and inquired, "Baron, what is the current situation?" Baron Trevor, Earl Fagin's cousin, lowered his telescope and snorted, "They're gathering not far from the city. The spies report fewer than 1,000 soldiers." "Humph, without catapults or any other siege equipment, those civilian soldiers can't even muster a complete set of armor. I'd like to see how they attack the city." After news of the Earl's defeat reached Jackdaw Town, Grizzly Castle's Fagin family, along with the numerous vassal nobles they protected, panicked for a while. Trevor, the Earl's cousin and head of the family's knightly order, stepped in at the right moment to stabilize the situation. Although his cousin, who had spent half his life in the military, had suffered an inexplicable defeat, Trevor had already formed a vague conclusion in his mind. A brave noble who always led the charge on the battlefield would naturally be defeated by his own recklessness and impulsiveness. Furthermore, with the enemy camp clearly aided by Union spellcasters, it was not surprising that Earl Fagin fell into their trap. But the current situation was different. Grizzly Fort had remained unbroken in its 100-year history. Even during the largest-scale fell orc invasion decades ago, those ugly and barbaric aliens, upon seeing its towering, sturdy gray walls, lingered outside for a few days before retreating in disgrace. The other party will definitely send spellcasters to sneak into the city to invade, but Baron Trevor is not afraid of them. In addition to the 100-man church trial army team that accompanied Earl Fagin, there are still several high-level priests and trial army knights in the city. The magic consultants hired by the family, headed by Angel, are also ready to deal with the enemy. A servant hurriedly ran up to the top of the city wall. "Your Excellency Baron, their army has begun to move and is heading towards the east gate. Why are you panicking?" "I already know," the Baron scolded viciously. "Pass the order, let the assembled knights stand by at the city gate, and drive those temporarily recruited mercenaries to the city wall to help us defend the city." He turned to look at the magic consultant Angel. "Mr. Angel, please ask your low-level mages and followers not to leave the city wall. I suspect they will send spellcasters to harass us first." Angel frowned and said, "Your Excellency Baron, should we send an envoy to negotiate with them first? The Earl is still in their hands, and there are a group of nobles who followed him to the battle. We at least need—" Trevor waved his hand impatiently and interrupted the other party's proposal. "The enemy is at the gate. What else is there to talk about? Even if we want to discuss the ransom for the release of prisoners, we have to wait until after this battle, and then we will negotiate with them as the winner." Angel froze for a moment, about to speak again to argue, when he heard the rustling of heavy armor and the clatter of footsteps behind him. It was Torre de Mir, high-ranking knight captain of the Inquisition, stationed at Grizzle Castle. He was one of the high-ranking Inquisition leaders dispatched from Golden City by Grand Duke St. Valen and the Church to reinforce Grizzle Castle. Another had previously accompanied Earl Fagin to Jackdaw Town and, like the Earl, had been defeated and lost contact. It was assumed he had either been ambushed by a spellcaster sent by the enemy or had been captured. The Pioneer Territory Lord, also a spellcaster, would not treat an Inquisition knight like a captive of the nobility. The feud between the two factions, spanning centuries, was a mortal enmity, so the Inquisition knight captain was likely killed in action. Our spies haven't detected any signs of spellcasters among the enemy's ranks. But we can't let our guard down. My Knights of the Judgment have assembled and are on standby. When their siege is thwarted, we will join you in opening the gates and charging," High Knight Commander Torre de Mir declared decisively. As the three spoke, the defenders on the city walls had already set up oil pans and piled up rolling logs. Hundreds of archers stood ready at the battlements, weapons in hand, waiting for the enemy outside to close in and launch an attack. The slowly approaching troops suddenly stopped, trapped just out of reach of the city's long-range weapons, and began to slowly spread out their lines, busily fiddling with something. "What are they doing?" Baron Trevor asked in confusion. "Not only do they not have catapults, they haven't even prepared ladders to climb the city. Are they planning to use the soldiers' bodies to break down the city gates?" Senior Knight Commander Torre de Mir judged. "Maybe they are waiting for us to open the city gates on our own initiative and fight them outside the city. There must be spellcasters ambushing in the dark, so we must not be fooled easily." Magic Consultant Angel took the initiative and said, "Your Excellency the Baron, do you want me to send a few low-level spellcasters out of the city to test the other side? If we can lure out their spellcasters ambushing in the dark, it will also help Chief Judge Demir lock on the target." Baron Trevor hesitated for a moment, opened his mouth and was about to say something, but suddenly saw several strangely shaped metal carriages pushed up from the rear of the army outside the city, carrying dark cylindrical objects similar to siege wood. He narrowed his eyes and pulled out his monocular from his waist again. As he brought it closer to his eyes, he noticed a blinding, glaring white flame emanating from the dark cylinders on the carriages. A low, distant humming sound echoed. Almost 2 or 3 breaths later, a sudden, muffled thunderclap erupted from the foot of the city wall, sending a slight tremor through the feet of those standing on the wall. What happened? Is that the Spellcaster Union's Dragon Flame Lance? Don't they only use such magical weapons on the demonic battlefields of the Evil Moon Mountains? No. The Dragon Flame Lance is an alchemical weapon that spews magical flames. It can't possibly reach the city wall from over a mile away, but the vibrations beneath their feet were so clear that it couldn't be an illusion. Could it be some new magical weapon created by the Union? Was this the thing that had defeated Count Fagan? Advisor Angel took the telescope from the Baron and peered through it, shaking his head in confusion. He then casually handed it to the bewildered Inquisition Knight Demir, who also peered for a moment before falling silent. Not long after, blazing white flames emanated from the enemy lines outside the city again, this time 4 in number. There was the same low humming sound, but the subsequent muffled thunder seemed even closer. A battlement within a few dozen meters of the 3 men suddenly exploded with a bang, sending countless rubble flying and large chunks of brick tumbling to the ground below, sending a thick cloud of dust billowing into the air. Baron Trevor instinctively ducked to avoid the impact, only to feel a ringing in his ears as if he had suddenly lost his hearing. Angel twisted his footing and fell beside him, leaving Inquisition Knight Demir holding onto the parapet for support. It took a while for everyone to recover from the sudden explosion. Then, they saw the upper bodies of several defenders, crushed as if by boulders, scattered across the ground. Bloody remains of limbs and scalding entrails lay scattered across the ground. Not far from these unfortunate souls, several more soldiers in chainmail had fallen, their armor pierced by tiny fragments of stone. Blood gushed from the sieve-like holes in their bodies. The enemy was still 1,000 meters away, yet a gap several meters wide had been ripped open in the wall. How had they done it? If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 291, Breaking the City in an Instant. We can't let them keep attacking us like this, with these long-range magic weapons. Demir, a knight of the Judgment Army, pulled the flustered magic advisor to his feet, his face grim. Open the city gates immediately and have the Lord's family knights lead the charge. There were indeed spellcasters hidden among the civilian soldiers outside the city. Judging by the intervals between the attacks of the strange magical weapons, it was clear that they required the caster's own magic to operate them. He had seen these wizards' alchemical tricks too many times in the Evil Moon Mountains. The best way to deal with them was to engage them at close range, denying them the opportunity or time to manipulate their magic weapons. Spellcasters have limited magical reserves. If they devote all their energy to manipulating their magical weapons, they will quickly deplete their reserves. These frail individuals would then be even more vulnerable than the unarmored civilian soldiers. With this in mind, Demir decided not to delay any further. He drew the enchanted longsword from his waist and clattered down the city wall. Magical advisor Angel, following the Baron's gaze, hurriedly followed. As the fierce, muffled thunder boomed from the city walls, the Earl's knights, gathered at the city gates, had just finished forming up, along with the dozens of Inquisition knights who had arrived shortly afterward. Each was checking their armor and swords. The deafening explosion and tremor overhead startled their war horses, causing many knights to tug at their reins and spin, throwing the newly assembled ranks into chaos. Did the enemy send a spellcaster to attack? The battle priest asked, frowning as he gazed at the knight Demir, who had hurriedly arrived from the city walls. Demir nodded, scrambled onto his restless warhorse, and raised his sword to the phalanx of knights behind him. The city gates are about to open. Follow me, everyone. The enemy is less than a kilometer away. We must break through their defenses as quickly as possible. He tilted his head and saw his magic advisor, Angel, following him. He said in a deep voice, "Mr. Angel, please send some men to follow us out of the city and assist us in dealing with the spellcasters hiding among the soldiers." Angel nodded in agreement. There were clearly no signs of high-level spellcasters among the enemy troops. Otherwise, those capable of flight would have taken advantage of the attack on the city walls. This also meant that most of the wielders of those ranged instruments were mid to low-level mages. With the church's Inquisition knights and battle priests blocking their way, their chances of victory were extremely high. After everyone was ready and waited for a while, they discovered that the city gate still hadn't opened. The gate, weighing thousands of pounds, was constructed of rolled iron bars and solid wood. It required several guards on the city wall to slowly open it, turning a wheel-sized capstan. But the order to open had been given for ages, so why was there no sign of the gate moving? Just as Demir was about to send another guard up the wall to urge them on, a muffled thunder boomed near his ears. Then, violent explosions followed. Demir grabbed his warhorse's reins, ready to use the brute force of a bloodline knight to quell the horse's agitation, when the massive stone bricks beside the gate suddenly shattered. Boom! A shower of rubble shot out from a thick cloud of dust like a crossbow bolt. Demir only had time to hear the whizzing sound of flying stones before he felt a sudden numbness in his chest, shoulder, and waist. He realized his armor had been pierced, and the body contained within it had also been pierced. The knight commander, gifted with his bloodline, immediately summoned all his strength, using his muscles to force the wound closed and slow the bleeding. As long as the wound hadn't penetrated his internal organs or head, this small injury wouldn't incapacitate a high-ranking inquisitor. But the next second, he heard the despairing sound of thunder reverberating in his ears again. Why are they attacking more and more frequently? Isn't there a pause between casts? As this thought crossed his mind, the horse beneath him suddenly shuddered, raising its front legs high and neighing with pain. The knight commander had no time to react and was thrown hard from his mount. The frightened warhorse, in its frenzied gallop, crushed his knee. A sharp, piercing pain made him grunt, and the wound he had been suppressing burst open. Two Inquisition knights gathered around him, drove off his mad horse, and dragged him aside. "Knight commander, are you injured?" Amidst the chaos, Demir turned and saw the knights in disarray. Many had fallen from their horses, and those at the rear of the charge were galloping towards the city gate, trying to avoid a sudden explosion. He grabbed a knight's arm and struggled to stand, but after several attempts, he failed. Gritting his teeth, he looked at his injured leg. His knee was a bloody mess. His deformed and shattered leg armor had pierced his thigh, and the faint white of broken bone could be seen peeking through the flesh and trousers. Demir felt a chill in his heart. The strange thundering sound was heard again. This time, it was the stone beam above the city gate that was struck. He saw with his own eyes how a huge stone brick shattered and fell to the ground, hitting a knight on his galloping horse, instantly crushing him and his horse into pulp. It's a high-level spellcaster. It's the Union's high-ranking wizards. A magical advisor from the Earl's family in the rear screamed in shock, sending the already chaotic scene into a tizzy. They weren't battling a pioneer lord from the northern wastes, but a high-ranking wizard from the Spellcasters' Union. What was the point in fighting? Staying here was simply waiting for death? The assembled knights turned their horses and bolted for the city behind, sending the magical advisors and wizard attendants who had been holding the line falling to the ground. They trampled on each other like headless flies. Knight Demir, dragged away from the city gate by two loyal inquisitors, had only gone a few meters when thunder roared and a millstone-sized wall stone whirled overhead. The stone hurtled straight at them, and the Inquisitor Knight General closed his eyes in despair. The last sound he heard before losing consciousness was a terrified roar from behind him. The city gate has been breached. 4 volleys, 3 missed. Lynx felt a cold sweat on his vest soaking through his thick winter combat uniform. He secretly glanced at the gloomy face of the commander standing not far away, and looked down at the 4 empty slots of the ammunition box at his feet, which was fully loaded with 12 magic energy shells. It's over. It's definitely over now. Obviously, during the daily training, the artillery group he was in had the best accuracy. They also fought well in the field battle against the enemy outside Jackdaw Town yesterday. Why did they perform so poorly today? They must have been dragged down by those useless comrades in the other artillery groups. He gritted his teeth and glared at the leaders of the left and right artillery groups. He found that everyone's face was not very good, and some were secretly turning their backs to wipe the sweat from their foreheads. The Grislaberg Gate, 1,000 meters away, was indeed a smaller target compared to the cavalry array of 400 or 500 men charging in a mass. But it was an immobile object. How had they managed to miss 3 consecutive rounds? Pierce's face was ashen as he watched the gate finally burst open after the final round of bombardment. A single thought crossed his mind. If he couldn't plunder enough loot from the Count of Grislaberg's city to offset the ammunition losses, even if Lord Harvey didn't reprimand him too much, Mentor Asdalin wouldn't let him go when he returned to the territory. And Reiner, he was most concerned about these already scarce and in-demand magic energy shells. Chapter 292, Fierce Fighting in the City. The Northern Army soldiers outside the city erupted in cheers as the artillery battalion finally blasted open the gates of Grizzly Fort. They needed no siege equipment, nor did they have to scale the ramparts, braving arrows and boiling kerosene. No defense could withstand the barrage of magical artillery. If one volley wasn't enough, they could just fire several more. As for the enemies on the ramparts, they were naturally targeted by sniper teams clad in shadow camouflage uniforms, who had been lurking on the western slopes. Snipers were constantly being targeted and falling from the ramparts. The artillery battalion didn't stop their attack, this time targeting the walls themselves. With several explosions, a crimson fireball erupted from the ramparts, quickly spreading across the entire length. The boiling kerosene, blasted by the magical shells, ignited the battering rams and logs used to defend the city. Flames and smoke filled the air, and scalding oil flowed across the ground. Soldiers who had just been preparing to defend the city fled in all directions. Many lost their way in the thick smoke rising from the walls and fell directly from the top. Others were unfortunately contaminated by the kerosene, transformed into huge human-shaped fireballs and leaped straight from the walls. The defenses on the walls have collapsed. Pierce looked at the smoke-filled Grizzly Fort, a subtle hint of bloodthirsty excitement in his eyes. From 1,000 meters away, he could smell the strong smell of blood, the burnt stench tinged with a hint of despair and fear. Watching those who were once his own people so easily lose their lives in battle, he felt no sympathy or pity, because he knew that if his side had been defeated, the enemy would probably treat them even more cruelly. Let the bloodline warriors of the Special Operations Squad lead the charge, with the regular troops of the Northern Army following closely behind. Pierce solemnly issued the order for the battle into the city. Remember, prioritize killing and eliminating the personal guards and knights of Count Grizzly Castle. Wayne has been here before. Have him lead a team directly to the Earl's residence. That will undoubtedly be their last stand. He turned to the artillery battalion and gave a command: cooperate with the remaining soldiers to quickly seal off all city gates. Anyone attempting to escape armed with weapons, do not wait for my order, simply bombard them freely. Soon, the horn signaling the battle to enter the city resounded throughout the army. As the captain of the 2nd Squadron of the 1st Battalion of the Northern Army, Wayne was tasked with the spearhead assault of this entry. His goal was to strike directly at Earl Fagin's residence and inflict a fatal blow on the remnants of the Earl's family who had retreated to the residence, attempting a final stand. Of the 2 Northern Army battalions participating in this battle, he was the only one fortunate enough to have secretly infiltrated Grizzly Castle over a year prior. Naturally, he was also the only one capable of accurately and swiftly locating the Earl's lair in this vast city, housing tens of thousands of people. However, just 2 streets from the Earl's residence, their rapid advance was hampered. The enemy had set up defenses at a street intersection, where the Church of Radiance was evidently located. 4 or 5 Inquisition knights, who had also awakened their bloodline talents, leaped in to block their advance. A bloodline warrior charging forward was struck by a sword from an Inquisition warrior who burst from a building on the side of the street, sending him careening into a shop to the right. The metallic clang of weapons clashed again from within, suggesting the injured warrior was still engaged in close combat. Another Northern Army warrior, also with awakened bloodline talents, swung his alchemical sword, instantly coating it with a thin layer of ice, and rushed into the building to assist. Be careful to avoid enemy arrows. Don't try to rely on your own strength, use the houses on either side for cover and quickly advance into their fortifications. Watch out for those Inquisition soldiers, ordinary soldiers, fire freely. Cover our bloodline warriors in their engagement. Wayne tucked his empty mana rifle under his armpit and, clutching his blades with both hands, swung them fiercely. Crimson flames erupted from his 2 alchemical swords, and his lightning-fast charge covered a distance of 200 to 300 meters in a flash. He leaped high over a row of wooden barriers and, with a single blow, cleaved a low-ranking priest cowering behind him, igniting him like a human candle. A crossbow whizzed from the side and pierced his arm, where his spear was held. The bloodline warrior spun around, swung a sword in his left hand, and pierced through two ordinary city guardsmen who had suddenly launched an attack, skewering them like candied haws. Wayne reloaded his magic rifle and shot a judgment soldier engaged in combat with a bloodline warrior in the head. Brains and blood splattered all over his comrade's face and head, but his companion laughed unfazed and laughed heartily. A few minutes later, the bloody battle was over. Two seriously injured bloodline warriors were carried on folding stretchers and rushed to the secured city gate area for first aid. The remaining lightly wounded soldiers skillfully retrieved bandages and potions from their combat pouches and tended to their wounds. They advanced another block and found more enemies. Although there were no longer many of the church's judgment soldiers with extraordinary powers, it would still take some time to quickly deal with these ordinary enemies. Oh no! They're stalling for time. Giving the remnants of Count Fagin's family time to escape, Wayne immediately sensed something was amiss. These nobles weren't all greedy and foolish, they also possessed strategies and tactics. And there were those knights who kept roaring and charging towards him. Even though they knew they were no match for the magical weapons and powerful bloodline warriors, they still fought bravely for their loyal lords without fear of death. Wayne chopped down a heavily armored knight with a single blow, then turned around and roared at the messenger with gritted teeth. "Where's Duff from the 3rd Battalion? Didn't we agree to provide flank cover? Where the hell are they? All soldiers, free fire. Don't slow down your advance, damn those nobles. If you delay any longer, they'll run away." The battle situation on the street was extremely tense. A large number of the Earl's personal troops and family knights kept rushing out from behind the enemy's defense line, almost using their lives to delay Wayne's assault team and prevent them from chasing the remnants of the Earl's family who were about to escape from the castle's secret passage. At that moment, Wayne suddenly heard a clear voice from above him. "Your flanking reinforcements are also in trouble 3 blocks away. They've been intercepted by a group of spellcasters under Earl Fagin's command. Mr. Eye of Illusion has arrived to provide support." Wayne turned and saw a slender figure descend from the sky in front of him. It was the astrologer. "Focus on eliminating the enemies in front of you. I'll intercept the remaining members of the Earl's family who are trying to escape." Chapter 293 Looting and Liquidation. Half an hour later, the fierce resistance finally ended. The streets were littered with enemy corpses, and even the stone floor was soaked with blood. Wayne took a quick inventory of his own casualties and discovered that more than a dozen ordinary soldiers had been killed. His face darkened, and he ordered his men to collect their fallen comrades. Without further delay, he continued on to the Earl's palace. Fortunately, he and Duff's squad arrived at the Earl's palace gates at about the same time. They immediately set up temporary firing positions according to the combat instructions, firmly guarding the main gate and side entrances. Duff's squad wasn't in the best condition either. At least he himself looked like he had suffered a lot. His uniform and hair were charred and tattered, as if burned by a scorching fire, and a large bloody blister had formed on his neck. While loading bullets into his magic gun, Dave spat heavily on the ground. Damn it! How could those spellcasters stand on the side of the nobles and the church bastards and even help them attack us? Several fireballs suddenly hit us from the roof and killed several of my soldiers. Wayne rolled his eyes and lectured, "Do you think all the spellcasters in the world are from the Federation? There are always wizards who don't deal with us. Don't be kind to them." Dave curled his lips and changed the subject. "Mr. Eye of Illusion and Ms. Astrologer have sneaked into the Earl's mansion. How come there is no movement? Why don't we just follow them and attack directly? This is the combat order issued by the commander. It is to prevent the remnants of the Earl's family from being destroyed together with them. Burn down this mansion. Don't forget, inside is the wealth accumulated by their family for decades." A while later, other combat teams arrived at the Earl's mansion one after another. Even the artillery battalion had finished clearing the road and slowly advanced with their artillery vehicles. 2 figures flew out of the 3rd-floor window of the Earl's mansion and landed in front of Commander Pierce. The Eye of Illusion discovered Earl Fagin's family attempting to flee in a secret passage beneath the Earl's mansion. "However, we've destroyed the exit, and they're currently trapped inside." The astrologer paused before continuing, "But a group of Earl Fagin's diehard followers have retreated to the Earl's family treasury and are holding the ground. They've also hauled in a large amount of wood and kerosene and piled them up. If we force our way in, they'll set the entire mansion on fire." The Eye of Illusion exchanged a glance with his companions, spreading his hands with a helpless chuckle. "We've already eliminated all of the Earl's spellcasters. We won't need to participate in the upcoming battle. You can worry about it yourselves." Pierce bowed and thanked the 2 high-level spellcasters sincerely. then called to the artillery battalion, which had already formed up. In that case, if you want to pay them a formal visit, you'll naturally need to knock politely first. We'll just fire. Earl Fagin's secretary, hearing the relentless rumble of thunder overhead, turned to Baron Trevor with trembling teeth. Baron, why don't we follow the Earl's family through the secret passage? I don't want to die here. A knight stepped forward, turned his sword's hilt, and struck the coward unconscious. He then bowed to the Baron and said, My lord, the kerosene and wood are ready. I only hope that when the enemy storms the mansion, we can engage them in a final battle. Baron Trevor, pale and silent, leaned on his sword. He looked around, feeling a pang of reluctance as he watched the entire underground vault, filled with jewels, antiques, and generations of family wealth, fearing it would soon be consumed along with him. The Baron gritted his teeth and made up his mind. A fire would conceal the entrance to the underground passage and create an opportunity for the remaining family members to escape. After all, his wife, eldest daughter, and youngest son were among those fleeing. Just as he was about to order the fire, a sudden wailing erupted from the underground vault's gate. The guards opened it and discovered it was the family members who had been ordered to flee through the secret passage. Baron, they've blocked the secret passage. A spellcaster has reached the exit before us and has barricaded it with a huge rock. We can't escape. The Baron's eyes darkened. They had sent a spellcaster in, but why had they only cut off their escape route and not the others? Could it be? He immediately understood their intention. With utter despair, he sheathed his sword back at his waist and whispered, Purge the kerosene and firewood from the vault, then relock the gate. Let's all lay down our weapons. Follow me out. The streets outside the Earl's mansion were deserted. Soldiers of the Northern Army stood in neat formation on both sides of the street. In the distance, traces of blood from the battle could be seen. Baron Trevor, holding his sword upside down in his right hand and clutching his 10-year-old son tightly with his left arm, led a group of relatives from the Earl of Fagin's family slowly out of the Earl's palace gate, which had been blasted bare by cannon fire. As they passed through the damaged gate, a palm-sized fragment of wooden relief fell from the crumbling doorframe and struck the Baron's forehead, causing a stream of blood to flow and causing him to squint. But Baron Trevor, steadfastly maintaining his noble dignity and decorum, led his group slowly to the silent soldiers and handed the hilt of his upside-down sword to a pale man dressed as the leader of the enemy army. We are defeated. The Fagin family chooses to surrender. According to the conventions and etiquette of noble warfare, we are willing to pay all the wealth accumulated by the family in exchange for the freedom and safety of the captives. Please. Pierce took the sword handed by the Baron, stuck it into the ground at his feet without much care, curled his lips and interrupted the Baron's words. All the wealth accumulated by the family? Mr. Knight, are you talking about those things in the underground treasury of the Earl's mansion? With all due respect, I'm afraid that they no longer belong to you. From the moment we entered Grizzly Castle, those things have belonged to my lord, Sir Harvey Floyd, as spoils of war. Trevor was stunned for a moment, suppressing the humiliation and anger in his heart, gritted his teeth and said in a deep voice, Then what can we use to exchange for freedom? Does your lord really want to execute a group of nobles? Even the Federation that is currently at war with His Majesty the Grand Duke of St. Valen would not do such a thing. Pierce laughed heartily. You have surrendered. According to the Lord's policy regarding prisoners, we will not execute you outright, unless you resist stubbornly like Earl Fagin. However, I still need you to return with me to the Northern Territory and personally meet Lord Harvey. Then you can plead and ask him what price you will pay for your freedom and your life. Baron Trevor's heart sank. His cousin had indeed not escaped death. This was perhaps the first Earl to die in the civil war between the feudal lords of St. Valen in the more than 100 years since the founding of the country. He turned his head slightly to look at the Earl's mansion, which no longer had the luxury and grandeur of the past, and for a moment he felt an incomparable desolation. Chapter 294 Ransom and Allegiance. Harvey sat leisurely at the head of the castle hall, slowly perusing a paper list in his hand. It was a list of the assets of the captive nobles who surrendered after the Battle of Grizzly Castle, with Earl Fagin's family at the head. Numerous warriors in crisp uniforms stood on either side of the hall, their gazes fixed intently on Baron Trevor and his group standing in the center. They wore neither heavy, shiny armor nor ornate cloaks or ribbons, and even their swords, casually dangling from their waists, remained undrawn. Yet, they felt a surge of pressure and discomfort. Who is Trevor Fagin of the Fagin family? The Baron's heart tightened, and he hurriedly stepped forward and bowed, saying, Respected Lord Harvey, I am Trevor Fagin, he paused and emphasized in a low voice, Baron Trevor Fagin. As soon as the words came out, he felt a little uncomfortable. The other party was obviously an ordinary civilian who didn't even have a noble title. Although he had the identity of a spellcaster, he needed to treat him so humbly at this moment. It was really uncomfortable. Oh, Harvey was a little disapproving and looked through the list in his hand again. Dachman Fagin. Earl, it's your cousin, your lordship, the current head of the Fagin family. Earl Fagin is my cousin. Well, I'm afraid he's not the current head of the family anymore, Harvey teased with a smile, causing the bloodline warriors who were originally standing by with stern faces to twist their faces into laughter. As the instigator of this war, I don't think I need to explain to you the specific process and final outcome of the battle. He paused, raised the page in his hand and continued, you should be glad that you didn't take the initiative to attack with Earl Fagin at the beginning, and until the end you didn't choose to resist stubbornly and lose your life in vain. Baron Trevor wiped the sweat from his forehead and whispered, it was my foolish cousin who easily believed the slander of a villain and coveted the imaginary gold mines and wealth in your fiefdom. That's why he acted so absurdly and recklessly. I tried to dissuade him, but it was to no avail, Harvey chuckled, remaining non-committal. Baron Trevor quickly said, I wonder how much ransom your lordship will require from us. Besides the treasures in the Earl's family treasury, we will do our best to meet your demands as long as the Fagin family can provide. He knew full well that the treasures in the family treasury were already considered the Lord's own and could no longer be used as a ransom or bargaining chip. However, the Fagin family had been operating in grisly territory for generations and still had many other fiefdoms and vast amounts of farmland that could be sold and exchanged. I don't need money, Harvey shook his head. And I'm not interested in your land or the businesses you run in Grizzly Castle, he nodded, motioning for the waiter to hand a sheaf of pre-prepared documents to Baron Trevor. He slowly explained, food, livestock, and people. That's the price I need you to pay. Asking for food and livestock was a normal request. Any small-scale conflict between the noble lords of the southern lands would ultimately result in the loser paying large sums of money and food. During non-harvest seasons like winter and spring, livestock and horses would be used as substitutes for food shortages. But what does it mean to ask for people? Does this pioneer lord need to drive a large number of slaves to cultivate the mountains and wastelands for him? It seemed reasonable, considering this was the barren wasteland of the north. My lord, there is no problem with cattle, sheep, livestock and food. The noble families will be able to gather them quickly and pay you, but as for the population, do you need a large number of young and middle-aged serfs or free people? Harvey took a sip of hot tea and said lightly, not only young and middle-aged people, I want craftsmen, farmers, hunters, fishermen. He pointed to the list in the baron's hand. You discuss with other captured nobles according to the numbers listed on the list. No matter how you distribute them, you must gather a population of 5,000, and these people need to be handed over to me as a family unit within 1 month. Baron Trevor's heart moved, and he immediately sat cross-legged on the ground regardless of the noble etiquette, spread out the stack of lists in his hand in front of himself, and read them in detail. Grizzlyburg has a population of approximately 10,000, and the surrounding fiefdoms of vassal nobles boast a similar population. Adding in the industrial population of the family branches, raising a total of 5,000 is not difficult, especially since the lord specifically requested that the population be reported by household. This means that if a tenant farmer has 5 members, all of them can be used to fill the total. Of course, the 5,000 figure cannot be entirely filled with tenant farmers. Otherwise, a large amount of farmland in the fiefdom would be uncultivated by next spring, and too many artisans would be required. The family's defeat wiped out nearly all of their accumulated wealth, making it a perfect time to recuperate and develop their industries. In a surprising twist of fate, the wasteland lord's demand for the ransom of his fiefdom's population had inadvertently helped him greatly. Otherwise, with Grizzlyburg in its current state of chaos, the severely weakened Fagin family would have been unable to control the situation. Furthermore, the other nobles would be eyeing this lucrative piece of land, now stripped of its authority and military power. He instantly realized that, given just a few days, he could make a big move here, calculating the optimal population contribution allocation and satisfying the enemy's needs at the lowest cost. My lord, could you please give me some time? Just 3 days, Baron Trevor pleaded sincerely. Harvey nodded in agreement. Then I'll give you 3 days. And, You can return to Grizzly Castle to discuss matters. Aside from the nobles who accompanied Earl Fagin, all those who surrendered during the Battle of Grizzly Castle may return first." Baron Trevor was stunned, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Sir? You mean, we can return to Grizzly Castle, gather some supplies and valuables, and then leave?" He had originally assumed that the enemy had left some troops in the city, intending to capture Grizzly Castle and expel all its nobles. The Baron had already planned his next move. His family still had a large manor house in a small mountain town in Grizzly territory. "What valuables do you want to pack up?" Harvey asked doubtfully. "There are still nearly 10,000 people living in Grizzly Fort, and all noble officials in charge of managing the city have left. Are you trying to throw this mess to me?" He paused, as if he understood what the Baron meant, and said with a smile, "Do you think I will occupy Grizzly Fort directly? Yes, in the future, this city will indeed only retain the army I sent as the only armed force, but the operation and management of the city still requires someone to act on my behalf." Harvey stood up, looking at the nobles of all sizes below with burning eyes, and asked slowly, "Everyone, do you think that with the force I have in my hands, His Majesty the Grand Duke of Jinhu City has the ability to confront me head-on?" Everyone lowered their heads in fear, secretly wiping the cold sweat from their foreheads, and dared not answer. Harvey didn't press them for an obvious answer. Instead, he turned to Baron Trevor, the leader, and chuckled, "Baron, I've heard that within the Fagin family, you, the only adult male besides Earl Fagin, were unjustly deprived of your right to inherit the title, correct?" As soon as these words left his mouth, a torrent of emotion washed over the Baron. Indeed, the Fagins were a family of military nobility built on force and war, with countless men having died on the battlefield. Earl Fagin was already the only legitimate son left when he inherited the title, and as his close cousin, he should have been in line for the earldom. However, the Earl himself seemed to have different views. He seemed more devoted to his incompetent illegitimate son, intending to defy family tradition and train him as the next Earl's heir. A sudden thought, one he couldn't even believe, welled up within him. Once this greed emerged, it was impossible to suppress. "Your lord," Baron Trevor found that his voice was trembling, so he swallowed hard, clenched his fists, and said in a deep voice, "Regarding His Majesty the Grand Duke of St. Valen's declaration of war on the Spellcasters' Union, the Fagin family believes that this is an illegal and completely unjustifiable act. From now on, the Fagin family has decided to stand on the side of the Union. We will do our utmost to cooperate with you and the spellcasters under your command to resist the invasion of the tyrant and the church." After that, he knelt on one knee and saluted Harvey with the etiquette required for vassal nobles to pledge allegiance to their lord. The group of small nobles behind him followed suit. Most of these guys were the second sons of the family, or the unlucky ones who were at the bottom of the inheritance line. After all, the real heads of the family followed Earl Fagin to join his coalition for merit and benefits, and now they are still squatting in Harvey's territory prison waiting for redemption. Harvey looked at the large number of people kneeling below with great interest, and suddenly found it a little funny. He didn't even have the lowest level of knighthood, but he could make so many true nobles swear allegiance to him. It seems that compared with money and power, the ruthless iron fist of war can touch people's hearts more. He still walked down the stairs in a pretentious manner, and with one hand helped Baron Trevor, who was kneeling at the head, to rise up. He said in a gentle voice, "There is no need for this. Justice is in the hearts of the people. Since you have already understood the wrongdoings of Grand Duke St. Valen and Count Fagin, I will naturally not blame you too much. Especially you, Mr. Baron. Sorry, maybe next time we meet, I should call you Lord Count Fagin." Chapter 295, Debate on the Situation. Carrot and Stick plan to deal with the nobles of Grizzle Castle. After all, Grizzle Castle was physically too far from Harvey's wasteland base. Unless they used flight or a magical vehicle to travel day and night, a normal round trip by horse and carriage would take at least a week. If it were simply a strategic defensive target, like a river valley outpost, rotating troops to control the city would be a piece of cake. However, if Harvey wanted to deeply involve the city's administrative management, the cost would be significantly disproportionate to the benefits. Therefore, he needed a person or family to serve as his agent. This person must be deeply familiar with the complex web of factions within Grizzle Castle, able to quickly calm the chaotic post-war situation, and willingly become a target for the other nobles, disrupting the past alliances and preventing them from turning against him again. In addition to demanding a certain number of people as the price of his freedom, Harvey also demanded that Count Trevor, who is managing Grizzle Castle on his behalf, pay him 30% of the city's operating taxes every quarter as protection money. This payment would secure a permanent garrison of the Northern Army at Grizzle Castle, defending it against attacks from the Grand Duke of the royal capital, Golden City. After all, according to past practice, the Fagan family needed far more than a 30% tax payment to maintain their fiefdoms rule. Count Trevor was delighted with the deal. This once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to inherit the earldom, combined with the de facto management of a city, would make him the most powerful figure in the entire St. Valen frontier, second only to Harvey. Attaching oneself to a powerful force was a wise choice for the longevity of a noble family. Compared to the distant Grand Duke of St. Valen in Golden City, a powerful and nearby wasteland lord was clearly a more suitable target for reliance. After sending away Count Trevor, with whom he had had a long secret conversation in the study, Harvey stretched and asked Asdalin, who had been standing by without saying a word from beginning to end, "How is it? Do you think the other party's sincerity and cooperation is acceptable?" The deep red soul fire condensed in Asdalin's metal eye socket slowly dissipated, indicating that he was breaking away from the absolute rationality mode of alchemical life. He is basically honest, but there is uncontrollable greed in his expression and words. It seems that this gentleman has coveted the position of count for a long time. Haha, that's good. Compared to those stubborn diehards of Earl Fagan, I prefer guys who can be tempted by power and interests, Asdalin said slowly. What do you plan to do with those diehards of the Count? Harvey waved his hand and made a casual arrangement. Send them to the mines and sawmills. These two places have always been short of people. This kind of free labor is the most popular. He then stood up and said to his chief advisor, "Today, please come with me to the Spellcaster Forum and sit in on this regular forum discussion. They'll be discussing the church's revival and the all-out civil war among spellcasters, which is of vital importance to us." In fact, Harvey had received a forum message from Mr. Scorching Overlord a week ago, informing him of the details of today's discussion and fully aware that he was sounding out the forum stance. But once the discussion actually began, Harvey realized he had underestimated the impact of the current situation on all parties. Even Mr. Elemental Hand, who usually opened the discussion with greetings, had changed his usual graceful manner. "Elemental Hand, praise Mr. Turing, Mr. Noemon. Good evening, everyone. The renewed conflict between the Church and the Spellcaster Union has seriously impacted the stability of many factions within the 7 wizarding nations. Everyone, we must take this matter seriously." Harvey had previously used the magic network to locate each of these original forum members, so he naturally knew that Mr. Elemental Hand wasn't a member of the Union, but rather a member of a fairly powerful neutral spellcasting faction within the 7 wizarding kingdoms. Even he had so bluntly stated the severity of the current situation, indicating that the impact of the rupture of the alliance between the two factions and the outbreak of full-scale conflict was already difficult to control. "Ghost Captain, but as far as I know, the current war is limited to a few small secular principalities in the central continent. Grand Oak St. Valen was one of the first nobles to formally declare war on the Union. The Church did deploy a large number of troops, but they and allies have only clashed a few times on a small scale. Mr. Ghost Captain was a high-level, independent spellcaster who clearly lived in seclusion. His daily location showed him perpetually staking out his position near the coastal islands of the Kingdom of 1,000 Sails, suggesting he didn't have a very clear understanding of the current situation in the southern border. The often fiery Son of Flame responded with a rather blunt tone, "Flame Son, humph, a small-scale conflict? That's because they're still wary of our strength. After all, during the recent battle in the Evil Moon Mountains, when we faced the demons alone, we were overwhelmingly crushing. Of course, those Gorous charlatans and the foolish nobles and princes who knelt at their feet were afraid." Harvey looked on, a mixture of amusement and tears. Mr. Son of Flame wasn't particularly politically astute, not realizing that the Federation's decision to fight the demons independently had given the Church and some secular kingdoms the opportunity to attack them. After all, fighting on 2 fronts, the Federation couldn't spare the time to fully focus on dealing with the enemy from its rear. However, his words made Harvey understand the theme and true purpose of today's exchange. The Federation faction, which dominated the forum, wanted to test the stance of non-Federation members and the forces they represented on this civil war initiated by the Church. Of course, the most important thing was to extract the forum's stance from Mr. Kilthuzid, the forum's agent, to determine whether it would continue to side with the Union, representing the spellcasters. "Frost Giant, no matter what, we do not want a war in the south to flare up again. After all, It would harm the interests of the vast majority. The recent tensions have even impacted the trade in magic stones and magical materials. Don't you sense that? The cave dwarves' passive attitude was clearly evident. After all, their faiths were already mixed within their community. The vast majority of dwarves worshipped the simple, primitive totems of their tribe, with only a negligible minority converting to the god of light. Mr. Forest Heart, a high elf who never hesitated to conceal his identity, also expressed his neutrality. Forest Heart, the Golden Forest has always been unwelcome to outsiders. Neither the Union nor the Church of Light are allowed to establish or develop their own forces here. Therefore, we do not wish to become involved in this extraordinary power struggle within the human race. While these words were true, Harvey still felt a certain disdain for the other party's arrogant and reserved demeanor. After all, the High Elves were known for their abundant magical plant materials and defensive artifacts, and the primary market and buyers were the human spellcasters he mentioned. Mirrorman and Shield, two members clearly identified as members of the Union, also spoke in turn, each expressing a pessimistic view of the situation. Their words hinted that this wasn't simply a power struggle between the Union and the Church, but rather a dire dilemma faced by all spellcasters. After all, wizards who pursued truth and magic were naturally ostracized by the Church, which held a faith in the gods, believing they were blasphemous and usurping the Creator's authority. Unfortunately, these formulaic speeches were too cliched and failed to easily sway the neutral voices in the forum. Ultimately, it was the most authoritative member, the legendary spellcaster Scorching Lord, who made a proposal that everyone considered reasonable and set the tone for the discussion. Scorching Lord, regarding this supernatural civil war between the Union and the Church, is it simply a power struggle between the two factions, or a struggle for truth between spellcasters and the gods? I believe that as the situation develops, everyone will naturally become more and more clear. But now that the Union has shouldered the heavy responsibility of defending the southern border against the demons, doesn't it deserve a certain degree of support and assistance from you all? At least in the face of alien invasion, we should have a cooperative relationship where we all prosper and suffer together, right? These words were indeed a blatant slap in the face of some neutral members. When you relied on the Union for benefits, you didn't have this indifferent attitude like you do now. Why are you all standing by and watching the show when the conflict breaks out? Scorching Overlord, our request is not excessive. Since the secular kingdoms affiliated with the Church have chosen to expel all Union spellcasting organizations within their borders, should the Wizard Kingdom and the Dwarven Elves, who have always had friendly relations with us, also make a gesture and close all church parishes, monasteries, and other missionary institutions within their control? This shouldn't be difficult, right? After the legendary spellcaster finished speaking, the forum fell into long-awaited silence. All neutrals were clearly still hesitant, waiting to see if the forum would step forward and express support for the Union on their behalf. Spell Shield, at Mr. Kilthuzid, as the forum's de facto agent, what are your thoughts? Harvey raised a brow, knowing that the highlight of today's exchange meeting had arrived, and the protagonist was clearly himself. Kilthuzid, we have always worked closely and harmoniously with the Union. Oh, by the way, you've all been too focused on the situation with the Union and the Church lately, so you might not be aware of the minor conflict that broke out on St. Varen's border. Kilthuzid, Grand Duke St. Varen and the Church of Radiance instigated a noble, account, to openly declare war on me under the pretext of suppressing spellcasters. Now he's been defeated and killed, and his vassal nobles have sworn allegiance to me and have clearly chosen to side with the Union from now on, assisting spellcasters in the country against the unwarranted persecution by the Church and the nobles. Chapter 296 Forum Referendum. Forum agent Kilthuzid's words immediately ignited a flurry of discussion within the forum. A conflict between a noble from a border fiefdom and a neighboring lord was certainly not a cause for concern compared to Grand Duke St. Valen's open declaration of war against the Spellcasters' Union, allied with the Church of Radiance. Forum members deeply involved in the conflict, Eye of Illusion and Scryer, were not members of the Union themselves, and naturally would not publicize the incident on the forum without Harvey's permission. Kilthuzid's reference to a minor conflict on the border stemmed from hostility toward spellcasters from the Church and secular nobles, demonstrating that their targets were unconcerned with whether or not they were directly affiliated with the Union, instead targeting all independent spellcasters whose identities were publicly known. The Son of Flame, who had always been close to Harvey, was naturally concerned about his situation and quickly sent a message to inquire, "Son of Flame, these sons of bitches. How is Mr. Kilthuzid doing?" Did the church secretly dispatch reinforcements, including the Inquisition and battle priests? Damn it. I never imagined that after we evacuated all Union members from St. Veron, the church would directly mobilize the feudal nobles to attack you. Shield sighed softly as he read the message on the crystal screen. Even putting aside the Son of Fire's personal relationship with Kil'thuzad, the mere fact that his only nephew was currently under his protection was enough to make him panic. I'm afraid that young Dirt was also forced into a brutal fight during this conflict. But how did he manage to withstand the combined attack of the nobles' elite knights and the church's Inquisition, even decisively defeating them and gathering a number of vassal nobles? Mr. Agent himself was a high-level spellcaster, but even a research-based spellcaster with a large core of mage followers wouldn't easily achieve victory in direct combat against an enemy with elite Inquisition troops and battle priests. Shield simply couldn't believe that the Forum wasn't secretly helping in this matter. Spell Shield. Fortunately, Mr. Kil'thuzad successfully resolved this crisis. But this also proves one thing to us: the church and the nobles and princes who have surrendered to them are targeting not just spellcasters affiliated with the Union, but all mages in the southern continent. His intention was stark. Even the Forum's agents have been forced into this conflict, so do you still think you can escape unscathed, Kil'thuzad? Indeed. Since everyone has differing opinions, why not follow the Forum's consistent principles and hold a fair and impartial vote, to be decided by all members? Child of Fire, I agree. Man in the Mirror, second. Earth Follower, before initiating the vote, I would like to ask, Mr. Kil'thuzad, does your position represent the Forum's position on this matter? Harvey smiled faintly. This veteran Forum member, clearly descended from the royal family of the Duchy of Berkeley and possessing both the status of a noble and a spellcaster, must have been wavering wildly in his stance during this period. He wasn't the only one. Many Forum members, labeled by Harvey as non-union members, were actually based in the capitals of some duchy or kingdom in the southern continent. They clearly held high positions and held distinguished status, having previously invested in both the Union and the Church, hedging their bets. It was time to give them a drastic measure to set their minds right. Administrator Turing, the agent's position naturally represents the Forum's. While we don't interfere in real-world conflicts, hostile targets that undermine the Forum's interests must be eliminated at the appropriate time. As soon as these words were spoken, the Union's three legendary leaders immediately understood and followed suit. Scorching Lord, I agree with this vote. I believe that Southern spellcasters should unite to fight the civil war instigated by the Church. Soul Reaper, I agree. Shadow Knight, I agree too. Union leaders, led by Spell Shield and Son of Flame, seconded the motion. Mr. Mirror Man, whose status was somewhat semi-public, also endorsed the resolution on behalf of the Alchemical Quest Society. Elemental Hand, I agree, but this only represents my own true position. Regarding the Seven Kingdoms Wizarding Council, I will do my best to mediate and gain a certain degree of support for the Federation. Elemental Hand's words practically exposed his true identity, but in a sense, they also expressed sincere support to the Forum. Earth Follower, I agree as well. The Principality of Berkeley will soon gradually expel the Church's influence and close down the large parishes and monasteries within its borders. As for the covert activities they are secretly guiding believers into, we will also closely monitor them and cooperate with the Federation at all times. The message was clear: they will handle the public affairs as nobles, while the rats and cockroaches hiding in the shadows will be dealt with by the Federation's branch in Berkeley. A clear stance indeed, Ghost Captain. Agree. Haha, I don't have the ability to influence the secular nobles' attitude on this matter, but I can completely cut off all the Church's recent trade and transportation of materials in Pharos. Rock Titan. Agreed. Crypt City will eliminate the scattered churches and religious organizations within the city, and effective immediately, will also prohibit the Church from operating in Breath of the Hills. Furthermore, we are willing to provide a batch of high-level magic stones free of charge, hoping to aid the Federation in resisting attacks from the Church and its vassal kingdoms. Seeing their usually stingy dwarven allies speak out, the Forest Heart, representing the High Elves, quickly stated that while the East has always resisted Church incursions, they are also willing to provide a batch of strategic magical supplies to the Federation as a token of their support. Dozens of Forum members subsequently took the floor to vote on the resolution. Some expressed their support, either openly or covertly, on behalf of the organizations they supported, while others openly voiced their support as independent spellcasters. Not a single dissenting vote or abstention was recorded. Everyone was well aware At least in this conflict between the Church and the Federation, the Spellcaster Forum had been exceptionally united. Any voice of dissent would mean the immediate loss of their precious membership, and the next step would likely be expulsion. Under the powerful threat of the mysterious organization behind the Spellcaster Forum, no one is willing to stand up and be the living target to be killed as a warning to others. Chapter 297 Grizzly Castle Police Department. After receiving the unanimous resolution from all forum members, the Federation was significantly emboldened. With the promises of assistance from various factions, they proactively proposed dispatching a corps of mages, primarily composed of mid-level spellcasters, from Dallas and the neighboring Wizard Kingdom. The corps would secretly infiltrate the St. Valen border region and harass the Church's Inquisition forces there. This operational plan was primarily intended to distract the Church, preventing them from continuing to target Harvey's outlying territory. This would free Harvey to completely seize control of the Grizzly territory, which had just been cleared, and create a vacuum of Church power in St. Valen's rear. The Federation is planning a protracted magical guerrilla war against the Church and the nobility within my sphere of influence. He had merely leveraged the Forum's identity to verbally support the Federation, and they had immediately understood his intentions and offered him a price he found satisfactory. This exchanged for the assistance of a battle group of experienced mid-level mages lurking deep in the border regions. This would at least allow Harvey's army, composed primarily of ordinary civilians, to reduce unnecessary casualties in their daily operations. As the Battle of Grizzly Castle had shown, the primary sources of damage were the noble spellcasters, the Church's Inquisition bloodline knights, and the battle priests. With the Forum referendum resolved, Harvey finally breathed a sigh of relief. The next major goal was to sort out the newly conquered Grizzly Castle and figure out how to deal with the remaining direct relatives and loyal vassals of the former Earl Fagin. Baron Trevor Fagin, who had been released, could only take his own branch of the family with him, while the former Earl Fagin's wife, illegitimate son, and several daughters remained in Harvey's custody. This was a situation Baron Trevor was entirely happy to see. Without a legal and bloodline heir to the title, he could more easily claim the earldom and devote himself to managing Grizzly Castle for Harvey. As for the civilians who had been dragged into the battle outside Jackdaw Town, Harvey had released them all. However, the mercenaries who had hoped to profit from the war were treated significantly worse. These opportunists, who often posed as bandits and plunderers in peacetime, were quickly devoured by Harvey's mines, lumber camps, and the farms of the garrison troops. 15 years of hard labor would be their ultimate fate. Pierce personally led a team of bloodline warriors to search the Earl's mansion from top to bottom. The results were quite encouraging. From the Earl's family's underground treasury alone, they unearthed 5 or 6 boxes of gold pounds, approximately 20,000 to 30,000 pieces. Although this was a lesser-known coinage of the Principality of St. Valen, the gold was clearly of high quality. Furthermore, the treasury contained a large number of gems, antiques, and a dazzling array of jewelry. What surprised Harvey most was that Captain Tommy, the personal guard who had awakened his weakness insight talent, had discovered a completely unknown secret chamber in the Earl's study. Inside, besides dozens of high-level magic stones and several boxes of magic potions, there was also a complete set of gleaming new enchanted armor. Judging by the inscriptions on the armor's lining, it wasn't some mid-level defensive artifact produced by the Union, but rather the magical legacy of an ancient wizarding family. As expected, the Earl of Fagin, a family that had ruled the Grizzlies for generations, possessed such immense wealth. The thought of such a vast fortune falling into his hands so quickly made Harvey marvel at the allure of plunder and war. No wonder those nobles and princes had found endless pleasure in their repeated conquests for centuries. However, the gold and jewels would only pass through Harvey's hands briefly before being immediately reinvested into the territory's city hall's treasury, used to purchase food and other scarce supplies. After all, in just a few days, he would welcome another 5,000 workers, bringing the territory's population to over 20,000. Senior Superintendent Uriel of the National Police Department hurried to the castle, awaiting the Lord's upcoming new work orders. I heard that the City Hall asked you to send a police squad to Grizzly Castle to assist the remaining Northern Army. Uriel stood upright at his desk, habitually straightening his collar with one hand. He replied solemnly, "Yes, my lord. The military has less than 500 troops stationed in Grizzly Castle. Besides guarding the 3 key city gates, we simply can't spare the troops to control the situation within the city." He paused and continued, "After most of our troops withdrew from Grizzly Castle, The city is currently in a state of complete chaos and lack of management. There have been many riots by criminals and gang members, as well as a large number of crimes such as looting and theft. Therefore, I have arranged for 50 police officers to take over the security management responsibilities of the city's existing city guard patrol team. It has to be said that Mr. Uriel, a former apprentice knight, has fully demonstrated his subjective initiative in his work in the short period of more than a year that he has served Harvey. Not only has he put forward quite constructive suggestions on several occasions, he has also actively cooperated with the work of the City Hall and the Army, which has made Harvey increasingly satisfied. There's no need to wait for City Hall's approval process. You will immediately depart for Grizzleburg and take charge. Follow my orders to formally establish a branch of the police department and select several officers you deem suitable. Also, begin recruiting local civilians of clean character and integrity to complete their training as soon as possible and join the branch. At this point, Harvey stroked his stubble and slowly recalled, "You've trained a group of experienced police spies within the Territory Police Department. From what I've heard, their work and performance are very good." Uriel blushed slightly and said modestly, "According to the concept of plainclothes police officers you proposed earlier, it's thanks to them that they've uncovered many spies and undercover agents in the territory, spies sent by surrounding nobles, speculators seeking to resell the territory's goods, and local residents colluding with the church." Harvey nodded and instructed, "This spy organization must also be established in Grizzleburg, and you must be personally responsible for it. I allow you to apply for several sets of two-way magical communication equipment to facilitate the rapid transmission of intelligence and information between the two locations." A hint of joy crossed Uriel's businesslike face, and just as he was about to thank Harvey, he suddenly revealed something even more surprising. "Haven't you been petitioning me a while ago to have all members of the National Police Agency equipped with the same magical weapons as the military?" Harvey pulled a rectangular box from his desk drawer and pushed it towards the senior superintendent, encouraging him. "Open it and take a look. This is a brand new security weapon designed specifically for you by the Arsenal and Alchemy Laboratory, the magical revolver. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels." Chapter 298 Magic Revolver. "A magical revolver," Uriel repeated Harvey's words with a puzzled look, subconsciously glancing at the rectangular wooden box before him. Judging by the size of the container, it certainly wasn't some modified magical gun. Though Uriel had only used the thing a few times, he knew full well that a full-size gun was nearly a meter long, with a longer-range sniper II exceeding 1.2 meters. Each use required a disassembled stock, magazine, and barrel to be reassembled. Thinking of this, the senior superintendent eagerly opened the box, staring blankly at the strangely shaped pistol before him. Its trigger and barrel were very similar to those of the magical gun, though slightly smaller. However, a strange honeycomb-shaped device protruded from the center of the gun where the magazine should have been. The pistol felt heavy in his hand. The grip was made of clearly carefully polished wood, smooth and comfortable to the touch, fitting perfectly in his palm. Aside from the grip, the entire barrel was made of metal. The honeycomb mechanism in the center and the surface of the barrel were still engraved with countless tiny magical runes, just like a magic gun. Combined with the original silver-white metallic luster, the entire weapon had an indescribable mechanical beauty. Uriel shifted the pistol to the arm with his prosthetic arm and was shocked to find that the metal prosthetic arm seemed to fit the pistol better than his real limb. He loved this weapon so much. He almost instantly fell in love with it. Alright, forget about its exterior. This is what I call a magic revolver, a lightweight weapon that can be fired with just one hand. Harvey stood up with a smile and took the revolver back from Uriel. "I'll teach you how to use it properly, but aiming requires repeated practice." Watching the Lord's somewhat clumsy movements, Uriel quickly realized that the revolver operated almost identically to the magic gun. Hold the muzzle horizontally and pull the trigger for rapid fire. The only difference was that the bullets weren't preloaded in a separate magazine, but had to be manually loaded one by one into a honeycomb structure in the middle of the gun. This honeycomb structure was the magazine, and its 5 holes could hold 5 rounds at a time. This was probably why the Lord called it a revolver. This weapon's design is truly ingenious. I've never seen anything like it. Uriel opened his mouth, but couldn't find the words to describe this magical weapon, which was cast almost entirely of metal. Harvey chuckled and said, "Don't be happy too soon. This is still an unfinished version with defects. There is a key technology that the military factory and alchemy laboratory cannot solve at present. If you are not about to rush to Grizzly Castle to carry out the task of setting up a new police department, I would not be so anxious to distribute it to you for use." Defective? Unfinished version. Uriel took the revolver carefully, held it in his hand and looked at it again and again. "Sir, with all due respect, I can't see where its defects are. Could it be that the power of the magic ammunition has been weakened?" "There is no problem with the ammunition. It's mainly the shooting range. Its shooting range is less than 100 meters, which means that when you attack with a gun, you must try to get as close to the target as possible." The magic revolver's range was a full half that of the magic gun. A major design flaw. Due to its compact size, Harvey and Chris couldn't engrave numerous magical runes onto its barrel. They had to completely eliminate the amplification and compression runes originally used on the magic gun, retaining only the stabilizing effect of the balance rune. Consequently, it couldn't use the standard magic bullets currently mass-produced by military factories, requiring it to instead use pistol bullets with a smaller capacity. Uriel, unable to grasp the Lord's profound magical theory, cheerfully declared, "I don't think there's a problem at all. Just give me some time to train the officers, and 100 meters will be enough for us to quickly dispatch them. After all, even the most brutal criminals and thugs, even in a face-to-face fight with the police, couldn't withstand the steel fists and metal legs of the Robocops who comprised over 30% of the police department." Harvey then led the senior superintendent to the small shooting range beneath the castle. He positioned him 30 meters away from a humanoid target and, following the previously taught one-handed grip, tilted his body slightly to aim the pistol at the target and pulled the trigger. The small, magical revolver instantly lit up with a faint glow of runes. With a soft click, the honeycomb magazine on the revolver automatically rotated one notch, revealing an empty slot. Several men approached and found the humanoid target intact. "Tisk," Harvey shook his head speechlessly. "Keep shooting." Uriel blushed, took a deep breath, and quickly emptied his remaining 4 rounds. Finally, one hit the target's leg, but it seemed mostly due to luck. Standing nearby, Captain Tommy finally chuckled, but then immediately covered his mouth to stifle a laugh. Uriel turned and glared at him. "What are you, a cheater with a weakness detection ability, so proud of yourself?" Harvey patted the young superintendent on the shoulder and soothed him. "Look, due to the pistol's short barrel and small size, its range and accuracy aren't as good as the magic rifles. Furthermore, the bullets used are smaller than those in rifles, so it's normal for them to miss the target. Therefore, you need more time and repeated practice, otherwise this weapon won't be very effective." Feeling ashamed and embarrassed, Uriel stood there for a few seconds, pondering. He gritted his teeth and said, "Sir, please give me a month. No, give me 2 weeks. I will have the police officers of the National Police Department familiarize themselves with and master this weapon as quickly as possible. I will definitely not let you and Mr. Chris down." Harvey nodded. "I'll give you a note. Go to Chris and the director of the munitions factory to get 10 magic revolvers and the ammunition you need for daily training." Uriel hurried away with Harvey's special approval note as if he had found a treasure. Tommy came up to Harvey with a smile and said, "Sir, can our guards also be equipped with this kind of weapon? When encountering emergencies and enemy sneak attacks, this pistol is much more useful than the magic gun on the back. At least it can be immediately pulled out from the waist to shoot at the enemy." Harvey was stunned for a moment, looking at the guards beside him who were drooling at the magic revolvers, and then imagined how they would look like when they tied guns to the gun bags on their waists. He slapped his forehead and said, "Oh no. I forgot to design a firing safety device for this thing. What if the gun goes off accidentally when it is inserted on the waist?" As he said that, he subconsciously looked between Tommy's legs, and scared his guard captain so much that he subconsciously took a few steps back. Chapter 299 A Typical Night. Hey. Get up. It's time for dinner." The jailer rapped on the iron bars of the cell door and passed several lunchboxes through the square window in the middle. Ambriki's bed was closest to the door, so he took the stack of boxes and distributed them to the others. Lifting the lids, they discovered that today's lunch consisted of soft potatoes soaked in broth and cooked wheat rice. Everyone sighed in unison. They had been imprisoned here for over 2 weeks, having been defeated by the Northern Frontier Lord's army outside Jackdaw Town. Ambriki had worried that he would be taken to the northern wastes and frozen to death in the cell in the bitter winter, but it seemed that death was still a long way off. The conditions in this cell were much better than the rumored cold and damp dungeons of Grizzly Castle. Bunk beds with wooden frames, thick straw and a blanket on top, completely impervious to drafts or rain. Imprisoned in the cell with him were 2 other minor nobles from Grizzly Castle, scions of vassal families under Earl Figen's fiefdom, one of them even holding the right to inherit the barony. Ambricky himself, however, was of a less distinguished status. His father was merely a knight of the Earl's family knights, retired early due to injury. He had fought for the Figen family for half a lifetime, earning only the non-hereditary baronial title and a lame leg that prevented him from ever mounting a war horse. Damn it! How long will we be imprisoned? My foolish brother and mother, haven't they raised a ransom yet? The oldest of the minor nobles muttered, throwing his food aside. Eating food worse than pigs and dogs every day is an insult to us. Ambricky glanced at him, muttering to himself. Pigs and dogs couldn't afford such a rich diet. They usually ate a mixture of cassava tubers and decomposed fruits and vegetables, a far more disgusting meal than the one before them. The Baron's legitimate son rolled his eyes at the older noble and sneered, "Ransom? Do you think this pioneer lord will really spare our lives, waiting for us to be redeemed so that we can regroup our army and take revenge on him?" Humph, when Earl Figen's head was sent to the cell to be shown to us a few days ago, wasn't his intention obvious enough? The young noble widened his eyes in horror and said, "What do you mean? Is this wasteland lord really so bold as to execute all the captured nobles?" He stood up and paced back and forth tremblingly in the small cell of less than 10 square meters. Finally, he couldn't bear it anymore and rushed to the cell door. He put his head as close to the iron bars as he could and shouted and begged, Someone, please let me see the Lord. I don't want to die. I don't want to die." The Baron's eldest son spat on the ground and cursed, "Cowardly waste. We are the glorious knights under the Earl, not those despicable and lowly mercenaries. Look at what you look like now, you have disgraced the nobles." As he said that, he grabbed the little noble and raised his fist to hit him in the face. Ambricky quickly stepped forward to pull the two apart, and whispered, "Stop it. Don't fight. If we attract the jailer, none of us will be in trouble." The Baron's legitimate son squinted his eyes, looked at Ambricky carefully, and sneered, "Hey, shepherd knight of Kenny's family in Milltown, what's wrong? You don't seem to be worried about your life being held in the hands of others." Ambricky, who was used to being ridiculed, sighed and patiently explained, "I've observed for a long time. Those knights and nobles who were captured with us and clamored the loudest were the first to be taken away from the cell and never returned. This group of people should have been severely sentenced, and may have been hanged on the gallows long ago, but you see, people like the 3 of us, are neither the Earl's die-hard confidants, nor did we fight stubbornly in the battle, so we should not be sentenced to death." The Baron's legitimate son was silent for a moment, nodded and said, "Yes, what you said makes sense." The frightened young noble finally breathed a sigh of relief, left the cell door, and lay back on his wooden bed, his face still pale. Seeing this, Ambricky also sat down against the wall and pulled a rough blanket over himself. He wasn't truly fearless, but he felt that begging for mercy seemed to be of no use. It was better to make the best of it and wait for God and the Lord to decide his future. Ambricky knew his own limitations very well. He was not cut out to be a knight. If his disabled father hadn't given up on the delusion of reviving the family and forced him to join the Earl's coalition, he would have preferred to stay with his herd of livestock rather than ride them into battle, galloping freely across the pastures outside the Milltown every day. Because of this, he was known as a worthless piece of shit among the knights and minor nobles, earning him the derogatory nickname of Shepherd Knight. During a charge, the knight commander placed him at the tail end, only to unexpectedly save his life. The jailer who had just delivered lunch suddenly returned and barked at the cell door, "Is Ambricky Kenny here? The city hall officials want to see you." It was over. He had just consoled someone, and the next moment, it was his turn to be let out. He didn't know whether it would bring him a trial for punishment or a family with a ransom. Ambricky couldn't help but tremble slightly, forcing himself to rise from the ground and walk out of the cell. Leading the way was a young soldier in a thick black fur-lined uniform, gleaming leather boots, and slung across his back was the strange silver metal spear that had brought the Earl's army a devastating defeat. After exiting the cell, Ambricky was shackled with chains as usual, his eyes covered with a cloth. He could only stumble and follow the soldiers on the other end of the chains. However, the ground paths in this wasteland were surprisingly smooth, and there was no need to worry about tripping or falling. The journey took quite a while, and Ambiki couldn't help but whisper, "Excuse me, Sergeant, where are you taking me? Are you going to convict me without a trial?" A calm voice came from the front. "Who said you're going to convict me? I'm only escorting you to the steward at City Hall. Don't ask any more questions." Ambiki wisely kept his mouth shut. These soldiers gave him a strange feeling. From their accents, they seemed like refugees from the wasteland. Their dress and appearance were nothing like those of the southern border. Yet, they seemed to have no fear of the nobles. Instead, they held themselves in high esteem, as if compared to him, they were more like knights of honor and esteem. Although he couldn't see as he walked, he could hear the constant chatter and hurried footsteps of passers-by, the ringing of bells, and the occasional child's laughter. It was the dead of winter. And shouldn't civilians be huddled in their sparsely populated homes, scrimping and saving to survive the harvest's absence? Why did he feel everything around him burst with life, as if spring had arrived? Confused and puzzled, he was finally ushered into a seemingly spacious, bustling lobby. Then, guided by a soldier, he groped his way upstairs to a private study. After removing his blindfold, Ambich, before he had time to adjust to the sudden brightness, squinted and stumbled back a few steps. Behind the desk before him sat a towering, terrifying humanoid monstrosity composed entirely of metal and machinery. Within its silvery white metallic skull, two dark eye sockets flickered with crystal blue flames. "Are you Ambich Kenny?" Chapter 300 Labor Reform. This is Lord Reiner, the steward of the Territory City Hall. He's a spellcaster serving the Lord. A secretary reached out to steady the frightened Ambichi, who was retreating repeatedly, and whispered in his ear. Ambichi finally came to his senses, swallowed hard, and nodded. So it was a spellcaster. Well, spellcasters weren't surprising in any way. After all, they looked insane. "Ambichi Kenny, a knight of the Kenny family in Grizzly Mill Town?" Reiner asked casually, not looking up, still flipping through the identification files of the captured nobles. Spellcasters were of the same status as nobles, so Ambichi naturally did not need to kneel on one knee to salute like he did when meeting a lord. So he touched his chest and replied, "Yes, Mr. Steward, I am." It turned out that this wasteland lord had so many spellcasters loyal to him. Apart from the man in front of him who had transformed his body into a machine, on the battlefield outside Jackdaw Town that day, Ambichi had caught a glimpse of two terrifying beings flying in the sky in a panic. No wonder they could lead a group of civilian soldiers without even armor and easily defeat the Figan family who had been entrenched in the border territory of St. Valen for decades. Reiner nodded and continued, "Reading and writing shouldn't be a problem, right? I heard it's a necessary requirement for becoming a knight." "Of course, Mr. Steward, I've learned both. Although I don't come from a prominent family, I've received a traditional chivalric education." At this point, Ambiki couldn't help but mutter to himself. While he was indeed quite good at etiquette, his riding, archery, and swordsmanship were rather lackluster. This was primarily due to the fact that St. Valen, an inland principality located in the north-central part of the continent, had not experienced much external war or foreign invasion in recent decades. As a result, the number of nobles and knights canonized for military exploits was decreasing. As a result, the younger generation, like Ambiki, lacked much battlefield experience and was valued by their fiefdoms lords more for their extensive knowledge and standard etiquette. Reiner nodded again and pulled out the page with Ambiki's name from a sheaf of identification documents. He spoke with a hint of sarcasm. "Your father, Baron Kenny, believes that as a knight under Count Figan, you should die alongside the defeated lord. This is the true honor and resolve of a knight serving his lord. Haha, in short, he's unwilling to pay the ransom for your freedom." "What? My father, but Ambiki couldn't believe his ears. His mind was a tangle. He couldn't believe his father would choose to sacrifice his own son's life just to show his loyalty to the already fallen Count Figan. Pedantic. Cold-blooded. Stupid. The young knight felt his heart sink. He knew all too well the fate of being forced into the Count's deathbed, the noose on the gallows or toiling in heavy shackles in the dark mines until death. Fortunately, the spellcaster steward's next words gave him a glimmer of hope. "You now have two choices, either be sent to the mines for 15 years to expiate your crimes, as required by the laws of the territory, or be stripped of your knightly title and become a farmhand in the frontier territory." The secretary handed Ambiki a work contract. Territory workers are not slaves or laborers, but freemen. They receive wages for their work and 4 days off per month. However, due to your previous actions, We will deduct a portion of your monthly salary to cover your ransom. In other words, you can redeem yourself through work. Ambiki held his breath and squinted his eyes to carefully read the work contract in his hand. He found the terms and conditions unexpectedly generous and accommodating. Besides being unable to leave the wasteland territory at will, he also received a single room of his own. Although the rent would still be deducted from his salary, it was better than being shackled and huddled in a cell with 3 or 4 other people. Besides that, his position as a farmhand paid him 80 gold yuan a month, seemingly the face value of the privately minted currency of the lord of this desolate territory. After deducting rent and ransom payments, there was still a considerable surplus for his own use. Ambichi did a quick mental calculation and realized that if he worked diligently here, it would only take 2 or 3 years to pay the ransom for his freedom, and he wouldn't have to rely on his selfish father to save him. He couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. Compared to hanging or hard labor, this was a far better option. Mr. Steward, I choose to work for the Lord and earn wages in exchange for my freedom, but I don't quite understand. This job as a farm worker doesn't seem to be suitable for me. I don't have any experience in tending the fields at all. Reiner laughed a few times and pointed to the information in his hand and said, "Didn't you like herding your family's cattle and sheep the most in Milltown? Otherwise, why did they give you the nickname of Shepherd Knight? You should have some experience in raising livestock. Do you have any other skills besides this?" "Of course. In addition to herding sheep, I can also fish for trout." Ambichi regretted it as soon as he said it. As a knight, he was not good at riding, shooting and swordsmanship, and what kind of skill is fishing? If he spread it out, he would probably get a new insulting title of fishing knight. Reiner didn't seem to mind and asked with interest, "Oh? You can fish too? Tisk tisk tisk, then working on the fishery department's fishing team is actually very suitable for you. Well, make your choice. Both the breeding team and the fishery team are very short of staff right now," and Bucky suddenly had the idea of working 2 jobs, and he couldn't help but start chattering about his rich experience in his side hobby. As for grazing cattle and sheep, if the shepherds rely solely on driving them to graze freely in the outdoor pasture, the growth of the cattle and sheep will be completely dependent on the weather. In bad years when the pastures are barren, the herds will even slow down their reproduction rate on their own to maintain the population size to ensure sufficient food. Don't look at them as just dumb animals. In this regard their survival experience is not much worse than ours. Seeing the steward listening intently, he paused and continued, "Thus, I believe it's best to set aside a few fixed pastures and rotate graze them. In the fall and winter, they must be fed some grain to help them store fat and withstand the cold. Also, I've discovered that these animals lick the natural salt crystals condensed on the rocks, suggesting it's essential for their survival. If we proactively provide them with some coarse salt, it might even improve their appetites." He then went on to recount how he had trained several hunting dogs, using a whistle as a command to have them assist him in herding the sheep, saving him a lot of running around. He also recounted how he directed his serfs to assist with the births of pregnant cows and sheep when they had difficulty giving birth. This lengthy speech left Reiner stunned, and finally, he couldn't help but burst into applause. "Very good, very good. It seems Lord Harvey is right. You nobles aren't all good for nothing, only wielding swords and oppressing the common people. It seems a bit of a waste of your talent to have you work as a common worker in the farming department's animal husbandry group." He scratched his smooth metal head, tore off a piece of paper, and began writing quickly. After a few strokes, he stamped it with his signature and handed it to the secretary, who then handed it to Ambichi. The shepherd knight took it and took a closer look. It read, "Ministry of Agriculture Animal Husbandry Group, Trainee Deputy Group Leader Recommended, Ambichi Kenny." End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.